All right. Welcome for the third and final reading of The Truth About Plato by Robert Carmen Dreyfus. We've really gone through a lot of geopolitical history, the battle of ideas, the geopolitical terrain with a sensitivity to things often ignored by polite academic analysts who try to write a lot of books and papers and comment about ancient Greece and Plato and Aristotle forever, and thousands of books, if not millions of books and essays and articles have been written that always seem to do the same thing, which is ignore the geopolitical reality that is accessible to anybody who cares to look at it, of the world that was shaping the potentials of Athens, the world that came before the rise of the Renaissance movement that was sparked in some ways by Solon and that was taken to another level by Aeschylus, Sophocles, the great statesmen, poets, playwrights, including Plato, his teacher, and his students. So this is just ignored. So that thus people don't have a context to understand what was the battle in Rome, what was Cicero a part of, what were the different sets of ideas that about the nature of God, creation, the humanity, that would manifest in different ideas of political paradigms. Either win-win on the one hand, an idea of looking for points of common benefit by looking to the future, creating situations where we could overcome limits to growth, create greater states of discoveries and their application on the one hand, or keep mankind locked in the cave, believing that shadows are reality by puppet masters. So people just they lack that. They just try to treat, an analysis of ideas as if they were just floating on clouds without thinking about, well, what was the identity of Plato? What was he trying to do? What were his students doing, right? So that's what this paper has been really nice at demystifying. Today will be our last reading. And for those who might have missed, who are listening on YouTube, who might have missed the first two, just click in the description box. You could watch the recording of the discussion and readings, and the original documents from the old campaigner from 1980 are also linked in the description box. I don't know if anybody feels like, I don't know if it's worth it or not. Does anyone want to do a brief recap of what they think was important in the previous sessions, or do we want to just jump straight into the reading today? I'll leave it up to you guys to decide.
Just a small detail, Matt. You said that it was written by Dreyfus. It was written by Charles Tate. I'm
Charles
sure you
Tate.
know.
Yeah, see, I'm
Yeah.
tired. I hit record after I gave a little disclaimer saying I'm on 4 hours sleep, very tired. Dreyfus, of course, wrote the Jesus, how Jesus and his followers saved civilization, which is in some ways a sequel, prequel to what we're reading now. But yeah, Charles Tate is the author. Thank you, Quan. Very cool. All right, so let's just jump right in and read. Hit a screen share. Okay, can folks see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Good show. So, all right, Macy says yes. Good. All right. So all we need today, like usual, is a volunteer reader. We only have about 7 or 8 pages. So, and I figured it would be a good idea just to go back one page to what we left off with, to just recapitulate some of the flow of the story regarding Socrates, what happened to him, after he was trying to organize and create a philosopher king. So the founding of the academy, I figured, would be an appropriate place to start today. Hey, David's coming in. Good. I know there's a couple of, at least one, maybe more members of the Holmes family down there. Macy or Madison, I'm guessing, are on right now. Do either of you guys want to read, or should we pick on Paul?
I can read.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Founding of the Academy. Soon after, Dion's intermediaries refused to accept his offer to refund the ransom and instead bequeathed the funds to Plato to purchase a group of temple buildings and athletic fields in a suburb of Athens called the Grove of Academus. On this site, known to modern archaeologists and historians, but astoundingly never suitably excavated, Plato established what is known to history as the Academy, named after the hero of the Grove, the demigod Academus. Here, Plato gathered his followers and collaborators from around the world. Eudoxus, Plato's comrade in arms from the days in Egypt, brought his own school from a city on the Black Sea and merged it with the Academy. Lists of Plato's students have survived, which show us that they came from all over the Greek world. These included several women, usually excluded from schools of philosophy. From among these, Plato and Eudoxus trained an elite group, equipping them to be educators of rulers. We know something of how Plato prepared his leading students for the roles they would play, but we have little information on what the leaders of the Academy did over the next 15 years. Members of the Academy were received as lawgivers and advisors by rulers throughout Greece, but clearly none of these appointments was the opportunity to change world history that Plato sought. Sparta was still pinned down by Thebes. Athens vacillated between Thebes and its historic rival Sparta. It is likely that the Academy played a role in neutralizing the friends of Thebes in Athens, and thus won the slanderous characterization that is still leveled at Plato of being pro-Spartan, not unlike being called soft on communism nowadays. However, the opportunity to attack Persia was still not to be found in Athens or in the far-flung listening posts where the Academy had established ties. The crucial flank was still in Syracuse. For a change there, Plato would have to bide his time. In 367 BC, almost 20 years after he had auctioned Plato into slavery, Dionysius I suffered the consequences of the civil life of which Plato had warned him. Dionysius died under circumstances which strongly suggest poisoning, while rival members of his family intrigued at court. He was succeeded by his son Dionysius II, a young man of good instincts but erratic moral character. The son, so long in his father's giant shadow, was awed and somewhat frightened at the thought of inheriting his father's throne. Plato's friend at court, Dion, seized this chance to prepare the young tyrant for the role his father had proven unable to play. Since he was the only experienced political leader in the court, Dion rapidly became the virtual regent for the young Dionysius II. Even the court cliques, which hated Dion and had conspired against his influence for years, were forced to accept his leadership. The peace Dionysius I had secured with Carthage prior to Plato's first visit was now threatened. The Syracusan courtiers, led by Philistus, would have been glad to see war spoils pile into the court treasury. They conceded, however, that no one among them had the stature to lead the city in combat, and the young monarch could inspire no confidence in the army or the city. Plutarch's account of the first state council held after Dionysius' death describes Dion's alacris. Sorry, what's that?
I think it's alacrity. Or
Alacrity.
am I getting that right, Paul? Is it alacrity?
I think so. Yep.
Okay.
Alacrity to command. At the first council, which the young Dionysius held with his friends, Dion summed up the political situation and the immediate needs of the state with such authority that the rest of the company gave the impression of being mere children. But what impressed the council most of all, since they were greatly disturbed by the danger which threatened the kingdom from Carthage, was Dion's undertaking that if Dionysius wanted peace, he would sail at once to Africa and put an end to the war on the best terms he could obtain. But that if he was set on war, Dion would supply 50 fast
Triremes?
Triremes.
Triremes. What is that, Paul?
It's a boat.
Ah, thank you.
triremes and maintain them at his own expense.
I've
think
got
it
another
had three
question, Paul.
sales.
What's the word alacrity mean?
Ability in that context.
Thank you.
Truthfulness, I think it's sometimes used in different contexts.
It
Life-
usually means
The,
readiness.
Fast.
the,
or-
abil- the, yeah,
fast,
yeah, the
fast and
ability to
readiness.
speak truly or to act truly.
I always
Yes.
thought it meant to act like speedily and readily and with
Yes.
fluidity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no
I think-
barriers.
I think it's more that.
Thank you.
Continuing on.
Yeah.
Dionysius II was a young man, about 20 years old, when he inherited the throne of Syracuse. It was his ambition to surpass the achievements of his father, both as a ruler and in learning. He had learned the rudiments of Platonic teachings from Dion before his father's death. Now his interest in the great philosopher became intense, and Dion was commissioned to call Plato again to Syracuse. Plato's arrival was celebrated as a great holiday, with public ceremonies and feasting in anticipation of the good fortune the return of the outstanding mind of the age promised to Syracuse. Dionysius II made numerous gestures to indicate his eagerness to put himself under Plato's tutelage. At one court reception, the priests intoned a traditional prayer for the long life of the tyranny of the house of Dionysius. The young tyrant, remembering that it was Plato's arguments against tyranny that caused his father to expel Plato and sell him into slavery, interrupted the priests and denounced their prayer as a curse. He then announced that he wished to embark immediately on a program of social reforms along the lines indicated by Plato, which would include the abolition of the tyranny. Dion and Plato were encouraged by the young tyrant's ambition, but regarded him as completely unsuitable to real leadership. Although he was attracted to philosophy, he had never steeled his mind in rigorous study, nor had he developed the steadfastness of character to practice the new type of kingship Plato envisioned. He was unprepared to maneuver through the wiles of the court and still in the grip of the Syracusan good life of feasting, luxury, and dalliance. Nevertheless, Plato undertook to turn the young ruler into a fit leader. Plato judged Dionysius an excellent mind, and one that could be nurtured through study to become the sought-for philosopher king. Dion and Plato immersed Dionysius in a demanding course of study of geometry and epistemology, making it clear that until he had mastered these, he would be incapable of carrying the political reforms through to completion. Dionysius' initial response was enthusiastic, not only for himself, but for the entire court. According to Plutarch, the palace floors were covered with sand and used to sketch geometric constructions, much as we use blackboards today. The courtier faction led by Philistus regarded these developments as omnious. The system of tax collection rights, large stipends,
Stipends.
stipends from the state treasury, and outright gifts from the throne on which the court retainers depended threatened to come to an end. The harem of sophists assembled by Dionysius I also closed ranks against Plato. Most prominent among these was a renegade pupil of Socrates himself, what is that?
Aristippus.
Thank you. Aristippus, who had sold his intellectual patrimony. What is it?
Patrimony or patrimony?
Thank you.
Patrimony.
Patrimony for a comfortable position as a court fop. His character is revealed by his remark upon hearing that Plato had refused a great amount of gold from Dionysius I. Such is the wisdom of tyrants, who offer much to those who will not accept, and little or nothing to those who will. These groups undermined Plato's influence with his royal pupil by playing on the young monarch's appetite for dissipation and love affairs, some not without a hint of blackmail, and on his eagerness for praise for his entirely negligible intellectual accomplishments. Philistus and his faction began to circulate rumors that Dion, assisted by Plato and Eudoxus, sought to overthrow Dionysius and seize power for themselves. Their educational program was described in court circles as a trick to soften the young tyrant with speculative fantasies, while the philosophical conspirators took the reins of state into their control. Dionysus fell increasingly victim to Aristippus and the other flatterers. He had not shown, they told him, the greatest promise at the earliest lessons Plato taught. Were not the difficulties he later encountered in his studies a result of sophistical riddles pronounced by Plato to undermine his ability and confidence in his intelligence? And had he not already committed himself to the reforms Plato and Dion claimed to favor, but now advised him against carrying out until his education was further developed? Plato recounts the tension this battle for the young tyrant's mind aroused at court in a sharply worded letter to Dionysius II written many years later. I declare that about 20 days before my departure from Syracuse for home, when Archidemus and Aristocutus were with us in the garden, you brought against me the same reproach that you now make, that I cared more for Heraclides and the rest than I did for you. In their presence, you asked me whether I remembered advising you, when I first arrived, to resettle the Greek cities. I admitted that I remembered it, and said I still thought it was the best policy. And I must remind you, Dionysus, of what was said immediately afterwards. I asked, as you remember, whether this was all my advice or whether there was something more, and you replied, with considerable anger and derision, as you thought, whence it has come about that what you then derided is no longer a dream but reality, and said with a very forced laugh, I remember well, you told me to get an education or leave all projects alone. I replied that your memory was excellent, and this education, you said, was to be in geometry, was it not? I refrained from giving the reply that occurred to me, fearing lest a little word might narrow my prospects of sailing home, to which I was then looking with confidence. Philistus finally succeeded in turning Dionysius II against Dion by manufacturing a scandal over Dion's efforts to secure a permanent peace with Carthage, the military adversary of Syracuse for decades. Dion was immediately exiled from the city, forbidden to take with him even his wife and child. With Dion went the war avoidance strategy he had carefully constructed to win the rich Carthaginian naval power for the anti-Persian faction. Dion made his way to Athens, where he was enrolled in the academy and taken into the house of a certain Calipus. Within a year, the war between Carthage and Syracuse Dion had sought to avert had broken out, dashing all hopes for the social reforms Plato and Eudoxus had planned for the city. One favorable consequence did result, however. Since Dion's expulsion, Plato had been held under house arrest because Dionysius feared that the philosopher's report on the Syracusan situation would reflect ill on him in the rest of Greece. With the outbreak of war, Plato was released and allowed to return to Athens.
Good. All right. Thank you. All right. That was a good little recap. So for anybody, I know a few people jumped in while we were reading this and might have thought, hey, I remember this from last week. It was just to rekindle our memory a little bit and get us back onto the stage of the drama. Does anybody remember the general strategic orientation that Socrates, Plato, and the nation building faction was really trying to do during this time? Like, what was the main strategic priority that involved creating a philosopher king or multiple philosopher kings if possible? What were they trying to set out to do geopolitically or as an effect?
Oh, I don't know. I got the main thing that they were trying to do with this young king was they had to teach him geometry and epistemology first before they can do anything else.
That's correct.
And
that was part of
that was the utmost thing. Before they can teach him anything about like politics or whatever it is, you need to be a country leader.
Yeah, he had to pursue the cultivation of his own mind first so that he could perform and use judgment properly when he would go and do things like make law, make peace, make policy for war, or navigate through the intrigues, right? That you have to be very wise and you have to really know how your mind works very well. So geometry is a really core component of Plato's method to study constructive geometry so that you can examine how your mind moves when it goes from ignorance to knowledge of something very clear and provable, like the doubling of the square, the construction of the pentagon, very, very, very basic things like that, to qualify yourself to then go out into the world and have confidence in your own mind and not fall for traps. That being said, do we remember what the strategic mission was of what Socrates, what Plato were trying to do more broadly, as far as dealing with the problem of the cults that were utilizing certain empires to get certain effects? So what was the main mission for a lot of
I
these
don't know,
Greek
Matt.
city-states?
I don't know, Matt, if it's a good moment now that I take 5 minutes to recapitulate the certain key moments in the 100 years before what is happening now. Do you think it's a good moment, or we can do it later?
I do think it's a good moment, but I also noticed that Dave stuck his digital hand
Oh,
up
sorry,
right
sorry.
before you. Dave, did you want to give that space to Quan, or do you want to speak now and then Quan speak?
Let Quan. I didn't have a direct answer, so maybe let Quan speak. I just had a context thing that I, at least, was a question for me that related to that. But go ahead, Quan.
Okay. So let's not forget that the big empire of that neighborhood at the time was the Persian Empire, who has been created in 559 BCE by Cyrus the Great. And once again, when the Persian Empire started, those people were healthy people. But what happened when the Greek started to start the rebellion against the Persian Empire? It was in 499 BCE. Okay, so what is called Asia Minor at the time is the western coast of what we call Turkey nowadays, which was part of the Persian Empire. And on the Mediterranean shore of Turkey were living the Ionian Greeks who colonized the region, let's say, starting around 800 BCE. So I want to put the landscape in terms of politics, in terms of culture. So there was, once again, since we want to be nuanced here and not put a picture not too much in black and white, but rather in gray, of course, there was a cultural background with the Ionian Greeks, which was not exactly the same than the kind of centralized empire that the Persian Empire was, even if at the beginning they were quite healthy. But culturally speaking, they had different representation of the world. That being said, the first attempt of the Persian Empire to bring down those pesky Greeks, if I may say so, because from the perspective of the Persian Empire, the Greeks were a pesky people at the periphery of their empire. Let's not forget, okay? Because from the standpoint of the Persian emperor, the revolt of the Ionian Greeks in 499 was a rebellion from his perspective. So he tried to put it down, and those Ionian Greeks went to the west to their Greek brothers to get some help. And the Persian emperor decided maybe we would have to deal with the Greek world to put an end to the problem. So the first invasion of continental Greece in 490 with the Battle of Marathon. After that, by Darius I, he died in 486 BCE, and his son Xerxes I kept on with the second Persian invasion in 480. They got defeated at the Battle of Salamis in 479, 480, and at Plataea and Mycale in 479. That being said, let's not forget that the Greek aristocracy of the time, because of the prestige of the victory of Athens, created the Delian League. And that Delian League was a kind of, let's say, for the first 25 years, a kind of collective democracy from its creation in 478 BCE to 454 BCE, when Pericles transferred the collective treasure, put on the island of Delos, hence the name Delian League, in the Aegean Sea to Athens. Let's not forget that that money was, let's say, crucial for the embellishment of Athens and the construction of outstanding monuments that we still admire nowadays. For example, the Parthenon. So the century of empire of the Athenian Empire lasted half a century, okay, from 454 BCE to 404 BCE. Because once again, there was the Persian kings, a little bit like the American Empire right now, okay, when use what regime change in Athens that would put some instability within the Greek world. So Pericles was the agent of the Persian Empire, and his behavior was imperialistic. And the paradox and the irony is that that imperialistic behavior was at the origin of the legacy of a lot of classical architecture. I mentioned the Parthenon 2 minutes ago. So within the shenanigans for regime change and to destabilize the Greek world, the Persian Empire would pitch Athens against Sparta. And that would be the source, if you want, a little bit like the deep state nowadays that would pitch a certain country against the other. Again, let's say the US against Russia, the US against China, for example. And it's not absurd to draw those rapprochements because of what I call with affection the KFC-ASAN, the kakistocratic feudal conglomerate of the Anglo-Sino-American establishment, from a theoretical point of view, would be identified with the Persian Empire, the source of the shenanigans. And Sparta would be the own hegemon, meaning the US, and Athens would be China or a combination of China, Russia, and Iran, if we want to make a rapprochement with our modern world. And the war that was used by the Persian Empire was precisely what is called the Peloponnesian War, lasting from 431 to 404 BCE, okay? And the Persian agent in Athens would die in 429 BCE. Pericles would die in 429 BCE, meaning 2 years after the beginning of the war, because there was a plague in 430, 429, and Pericles was one of the victims of the plague. So let's not forget also that, as Charles Tate wrote very interestingly, that what is called the southern Italian peninsula right now, and which was called the Magna Graecia or Great Greece at the time, was the equivalent, as Charles Tate wrote, of the New World for the Greek. Okay, so since the old aristocracy in Athens were quite degenerate and infiltrated by the Persian Empire, that's why Socrates tried to teach those aristocrats, and his student Plato wrote the dialogues to uplift the mentality of those degenerate aristocrats. Well, Plato tried to go to the New World, and the New World for the Greek at the time was Sicily and southern Italy, and more precisely Syracuse. And make no mistake, okay, Syracuse was not only a city, it was a small empire. The island of Sicily, which is about 26,000 square kilometers, would in our eyes is laughable because we're used now with empire with 10 million square kilometers or things like that. But at that time, it was not bad. And the city of Syracuse was ruling over half of the island of Syracuse. The other half, or the other third, the western third, was in the hand of Carthage or Carthage, the other major empire at the time, because Rome was not yet important enough. Okay, so the two big empires of the Mediterranean Sea at the time, on the east side was the Persian Empire, and the west side was Carthage. And I just want to mention a last character, Alcibiades, born in 450 and died in 404 BCE. Okay, so he was 20 years younger than Socrates and about 25, 23 years older than Plato. And Alcibiades was precisely the unfortunate commander of the Athenian expedition of 413, 412 BCE against Syracuse, and he lost that battle. And once again, it was part of the destabilization of the Greek world, because once again, the see things from the perspective of the big guy in that neighborhood at the time. Okay, the big guy in the neighborhood at the time was not Athens nor Sparta. The big guy in that neighborhood at the time were the Persian Empire on the east side and Carthage on the west side. So the Greek were outstanding not because of their military power or their possessions, but rather for their originality from a perspective of how to rule people. Because even if they were mostly oligarchical at the time, there was an epistemological hope that there would be a higher form of government, because at the time, the highest form of government was considered what we would call enlightened monarchy, and the Greek were special because they can respect enlightened monarchy, but because of their specific culture, they strive more towards what we call republic. And the next section that we will read, the Plato Republic, is precisely an ideal representation of that Greek dream. I stop here for now.
Thank you, Quan. Dave, did you want to add to that at all, or are you satisfied?
Yeah, I was going to ask about exactly the kind of things that the Peloponnesian War, and that's how ultimately that screwed up. That sealed the fate of what were a lot of good things. And here we are.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Because from the perspective of the Persian Empire, they were successful, okay? Because the Peloponnesian War destroyed the possibility of the Greek dream. And that Greek dream would maybe, and it's debatable, would maybe be achieved in part with the conquest by Alexander in 330 of the Persian Empire.
Don't spoil the punchlines here. All right, cool.
Come on, Matt. Everyone knows that.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's get back to.
Wait a minute.
Oh yeah. Go,
Matthew.
Jump in. Yes, do it.
Would you restate your question that you were asking a minute ago?
I was asking, what was the grand strategy that decades and decades of grand strategists like Socrates, like Plato, and their collaborators were trying to do? Now, Quan touched on it pretty nicely. Maybe it wasn't as explicit as I was going for, but that's okay. Implicit is good too. But what was the grand strategy that they were trying to accomplish that was being thwarted or undermined by smaller minds, tragically, again and again? But what was it that they were trying to do?
Okay, on one hand, I really wish you would give us your answer to that, but just, I don't know, at a very basic level, isn't it they want to be free of the Persian Empire?
Yeah.
And they're trying to unite the Greek city-states instead of warring against each other.
Well, in a few words, it's the vision of enlightened oligarchy versus republicanism. Okay, I don't use the word democracy because for Plato, a democratic man is a lowly man. Okay, so I use the dream of republicanism versus enlightened oligarchy, because once again, I don't want to fall into the trap. That is a small critics against Charles Tate that I'm giving here, of complete evil, which is the Persian Empire, against a complete light, which is the Greek word. I think that's a little bit laughable, because within the Persian Empire, you have enlightened oligarchy, and unenlightened oligarchy is not complete darkness.
Yeah. What I was, yeah, that's good points all around. And to remind people as well who might be watching on YouTube, the script by Charles Tate is what's called a strong hypothesis, a very informed hypothesis, but a hypothesis nonetheless that must not be treated as gospel truth, but a strong way of looking at and analyzing a process in history. And yeah, Susie, that's essentially on a practical level. I was kind of just going for that. Try to create a situation of an alliance that could be endurant and not like the Delian League that would get petered out by a corrupt player that would gain power and backstab their allies, but rather get a situation where people could get over their hostilities that had been caused by years and generations of warfare with their neighbors, and have trust, but do it in a rational way, such that you could get an alliance based on visions of the future that were workable, reasonable, possible, and necessary, that would allow for a power that would be strong enough to do battle properly with that type of oligarchical command structure that was represented by the Persian Empire of the day. So I think everybody kind of, answered that indirectly and directly in the course of this. So that was great. And just to get across, this is what's been animating, whether it's Charlemagne's period of the Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Chinese alliance of the 9th century, or whether you look at the League of Cambrai and that alliance. This is sort of the organic yearning of that sort of ties universal history as a unity, right? And that there's this quality of classical tragedy that showcases where this beautiful goodness is derailed by small minds, not understanding sophistry, not understanding themselves, and making actions and policy that is premature, and they become their own worst enemy, and the enemy ultimately of humanity against their own desires. So part of what I want people to just hold in their mind is they're thinking about the present when they're reading this. That was basically my hope.
Yeah, and it always does need to be brought out and enlarged for our vision today. Just even what we went through with, I think it was Plato's working with Dionysius II, and him wanting him to study geometry and epistemology, the growth of the mind and learning to know yourself and how your mind works, gaining some wisdom along the way, but also your mind and heart being opened to recognize wisdom, but then also trained to recognize and withstand the sophistry and the flattery. So much of what the oligarchical system does, is inflame differences and inflame grudges, and growth and wisdom can help you see beyond that and choose to move past it. And all of those factors, you can just see the struggle of these people are trying to nurture these seeds and help them to grow. And then other people that are just satisfied with their cushy little spot are working to stomp on those seeds whenever they pop up. Okay, let's get back at it.
Well said. All right. So who wants to pick up the torch of reading for the next section?
I'm good to keep going if that's okay.
Yeah. Keep going.
Okay. Plato's Republic.
Yay.
Paul gets a break.
Sometime following his return to Athens, Plato undertook the composition of a dialogue containing, in the most vivid and comprehensive way, his reflections and conclusions concerning his 2 battles to establish in Syracuse the new base of operations for the anti-Persian struggle. This dialogue is the well-known but little understood Republic. In the Republic, Plato directly addresses the question of the political leadership needed not only to rid the world of Persia, but to rule it well. Through the dialogue, the curriculum for the development of this new type of leadership was made available for the first time to the larger circle of students and collaborators gathered around the academy. With an eye to the past, the Republic is the summation of Plato's 2 decades of political organizing, his reflection on his experience in attempting to recruit the Dionysi as philosophers and leaders of the anti-Persian faction. Looking forward, it lays the basis for the political battles to come by throwing open the royal road to knowledge, the lessons the moral cowardice of the Dionysi prevented them from learning, to the political cadre Plato was now training to continue those battles. The question of political leadership, Plato says, is fundamentally a question of education. In the Republic, Plato puts forward his program for the education of the philosopher king, the new type of leader the Academy would offer to the Greek world for the rest of Plato's life. Training in music and gymnastics, followed by a rigorous instruction in geometry, would create men capable of examining the lawfulness of mind itself, capable of becoming conscious masters of their own powers of creativity. Such persons, in turn, would make it their business to educate their societies, to endow the citizens under their direction with enhanced capabilities to lead just and productive lives. It is here that Plato presents the well-known characterization of the development of citizens as bronze, silver, and golden souls. These represent, respectively, the individual concerned only with personal sensual gratification, the rational individual who strives to conduct his affairs according to existing laws, and the individual who functions on the basis of creative reason to expand man's mastery over the universe. Plato's educational program is both discussed and shown in action by Socrates, who is seeking to organize a very difficult audience of radical Democrats to recreate themselves after the pattern and example he offers. In this sense, the Republic is a consummate political organizing drama. However, it is not to be taken as a political manifesto. The city created in the Republic is not offered as an ideal, but as a means of developing the conception of the philosopher king, the master of what we know today as Platonic method. Those today who seek to label Plato as a totalitarian by seizing upon one or another specific feature of the city created in words in the dialogue, as if it were Plato's political program, willfully ignore Plato's repeated explicit disclaimers of any such intention. At the time of its composition, the Republic was probably the supreme literary achievement of mankind. However, the political conjuncture following the collapse of the Syracusan campaigns demanded a new political program, one consistent with reason, but aimed at rulers not equipped to become philosopher kings, more ordinary silver-souled men and women. These, like most of our political leaders today, were persons who could listen to reason, but who were incapable of organizing it, whose conscious mastery of creativity, reason's hallmark, was blocked. In a series of dialogues undertaken after the Republic, the theaist, sophist, and statesman, Plato boldly re-examined his entire epistemological and political theory using, as he put it, entirely new weapons, although some may be the same as before. One result of this work was the establishment of the model for our US Constitution, a theory of mixed government, which Plato called the second best state. The second best state combined monarchy in the form of a chief executive, aristocracy in the form of a council of advisors, and even democracy in the form of a popular assembly. It was not to be expected that such a government would be ruled by philosopher kings who were the masters of creative reason, but instead by men and women who could recognize and cherish the fruits of reason. Such a government would have to be guided by written and unalterable laws. It would have to be, in the words of Plato that were quoted again and again by our founding fathers, a government of laws and not of men. With this program of the second best state, Plato and his collaborators fanned out across the Mediterranean to establish new fronts in the battle against Persian despotism.
Good. Any thoughts, questions, or should we just push on?
Maybe just 30 seconds.
Please take 40.
Okay, so at the beginning of page 41, when in a series of dialogues undertaken after the Republic, the Theaetetus, the Sophist, and the Statesman, Plato boldly re-examined his entire epistemological and political theory. I just want to stress that those, except the Republic, that is a shining star by its own, the Theaetetus, the Sophist, and the Statesman are very special because those three give exactly the ascending learning of the epistemological stages. Okay, in the Theaetetus, stage 1, 2, 3, meaning the sense perception, the intellect, and the psyche are examined in detail. In the Sophist, the transition, the very important, is not essential and vital transition from the psyche stage 3 to stage 4, which is the timeless form of beauty corresponding to justice, is examined deeply. And state man is the stage of the aristocratic man, the stage of creativity, inventivity, discovery, and playful exploration. So it's so important. I just want to take 30 seconds for that.
I would add.
Yes, David?
I would, sorry. And Igor, first question, sorry, was the laws after or before the ones you said?
No, the laws is the last one of Plato.
Yeah, and that's the one that we're going to be doing a series on as well. That's definitely one we all have to. It's more practical, right? He envisions magnesia. He has a new. So yeah, it keeps going. Like it's so rich, and like we've had such a narrow. We've been given, right, even like in all the mainstream or even academic sort of specialized, like we've been given a very narrow snippet of Plato's work. There's much more to get excited about.
Yeah, I just want to say that the law was his practical legacy, because in the Republic, it was the philosopher king who let his imagination and his creativity get loose. But the laws is when he had to get down to earth. But still, with a lot from the Republic, of course.
Of course.
Cool. All right. Yeah, and I like this idea too of the United States as well being representative of not any one of the 4 or 5 different types of social organization of governments that were examined in the Republic, but more so it was an attempt to resolve some of those paradoxes built into the Republic by trying to find the best admixture of the of what was just said there.
But I dare say that it was implicit in the Plato Republic, in the sense that he was, as the true aristocrat that he was, because Plato was an aristocrat by birth and an aristocrat by epistemology. So as a true aristocrat that he was looking down a little bit on the democratic man, but at the same time, he was practical. It was clear in his mind and in his text that he wanted to give them a certain participation to the life of the city, because after all, they were, in terms of number, the majority of the people in the city. And if you don't let them participate to a certain extent, it would be a loss for the city. And I would say that if the United States truly has aristocratic man, they would be capable to orchestrate the democratic man. And the chaos that we see right now is because there are no aristocratic man to orchestrate precisely the demos.
Good points as well. Yeah.
I was gonna. Yeah, Kelly, go ahead. This is aristocratic man. Is that the kind of man that he uses like creative reasoning as
Absolutely.
opposed?
Well, we'll define it. I mean, it means ruled by the best in an aristocracy. So if you just take it from its simple meaning, aristocracy is ruled by the best, oligarchy is ruled by the few. So that has a very wide field of meaning. Whether or not
Matthew, I'm sorry to interrupt you, because here there's a point that I absolutely want to stress. Okay, and 10 times.
Go ahead. Just before you.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just before you say anything, like I was referring to when in the last chapter, he's referring to the bronze, silver, and gold, the way he kind of labeled people.
Yes, absolutely. Well, bronze for him gold is the aristocratic man, okay? Silver is the democratic man, the fourth stage, and bronze is the 1, 2, 3, okay? The psyche, the third stage. So for him, it's a poetic way to talk about the epistemological stages.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to say something more or something else, okay?
No, not really.
Okay, so I don't want to forget my point, okay? Because that's one of my obsessions. So sorry if I am a little bit of the pain in the neck for those things. Oligarchy is the rule by the few, that's true. But what is the quality of those few? Okay, those few can be of the tyrannical quality, because a tyrant is not only one, okay? So if there's a few, one or two is certainly a few. Or is it a plutocratic oligarchy, meaning the rule by the few, but those few are of plutocratic quality? Or the rule by a few, but of aristocratic quality? Okay, you can have an aristocratic oligarchy. It doesn't mean that under an aristocratic oligarchy that the democratic man or the plutocratic man cannot participate to a certain level according to the capacity to the role of the state. So here, I think that the fact that Plato was very implicit, and I would say quite explicit too, in the Republic and the Laws, that when he was speaking of an aristocracy, it means that the aristocrats are at the center of the city, but it doesn't mean that they monopolize all the powers, but they orchestrate the power. They are the people coordinating the government. I stop here for now.
Arete is excellence. So aristocracy comes from that. So excellence.
Yes, absolutely. So once again, Plato was not totalitarian, but he was clearly hierarchical. For him, there is a hierarchy in the epistemological journey, and in the perfect, not perfect, but let's say humane state, the best, meaning the aristocrats, have to be at the helm of the state, but they have to be creative enough to make space for the other kind of man, okay, the democratic man, the plutocratic man, and the democratic man.
But I would add one thing though, or as a question, what would qualify one to be to become a true aristocrat and not simply somebody who's acting like they're the best? Like, what do you have? What qualifies one?
Well, you have this meritocratic system that a person would serve at the lowest rank when he wants to enter into politics. And he will progress in his political career, meaning that he will have more and more power as long as he's performed in an adequate manner at the lower ranks. Yeah. Here we have the problem is that for how can I say that? To validate an aristocrat, you need to create an aristocratic group first.
Yeah.
And that is the difficult step, because if you don't have that aristocratic group first, who will validate the future aristocrat? Okay, or to ask the famous question, who will keep the guardians?
Yeah. Also, I think we have to think about also the oligarchy who sees themselves as the best, right? They're the self-professed, like John Ruskin and all of these Neoplatonists. They call themselves the aristocratic guardians. Mark Carney and the WEF group. They actually call themselves. They have a team called the Guardians of the World. Yeah. So it's important, I think, for people who might be listening on YouTube, to just keep in mind that they have the fixed idea that the golden souls, the silver souls, the caste system of souls is a fixed set of castes, like a fixed set of categories that you're sort of predestined by your genetics, by your blood. In those days, today we use words like genetics, but it's the same kind of thing that's tied to somehow some spiritualism of the soil that they kind of add on to. Whereas Plato, by looking at all of his dialogues, you start seeing that he actually is very clear that everybody has within them something that can be brought out and that they desire to make, that will make them ultimately happier by an act of self-examination, self-discovery. So he believes that that everybody could feasibly become a golden soul if they're given the opportunities and they're able to access that within them, that enthusiasm, as Quano often says, the God within. But if they don't, then if you don't see that ability for everybody to transform by making discoveries, then you can't resolve the paradox that the oligarchy doesn't want to resolve, which is, you know, a few are born to lead and many are born to be ruled over.
And if you bear with me,
because I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I wouldn't go after. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say it's really important for those of us who are less familiar with like the works of Plato to go back and study the original meanings of these words, because even the way the term aristocrat is used today, you know, they've managed to get some of these things practically set in stone, their hierarchical structure, and none of it is actually valid, or maybe I should say very little of it is actually valid, because there's very few in that structure that actually meet the definition of an aristocratic man. And I want to restate, I think it's the way that you have expressed it, but a truly aristocratic man at that level of epistemological growth will seek power and knowledge to uplift those around him, not rule over them and suppress them and use them.
Yes,
it's absolutely. That whole idea of going back into the cave to free others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some.
Yeah, sadly, there's a shortfall of such people.
Yeah. I see. Wait, hold on, Quan. I'm so sorry. Monty hasn't had a chance. Monty, I see you trying to talk there. Wait, what's up, man?
Yeah, I just think there is some confusion for us that aren't really that educated on this history of the confusion around Aristotle, who must have been named after this, after the idea of
aristocrat.
You know, I mean, because typically when we think of Aristotle, he certainly wasn't a golden soul. He was a lower level, but he was actually, it seems to me, he was named after this idea, after this ideal of an aristocrat.
Yes.
Which he really, he was something much less.
I would say let's do this. Quan, I'm going to give you the last word for this moment here before you go on, because I know that a lot of the stuff we're bringing up is going to come up in the text, so I don't want to overstate anything too much. But if you want to say your insight or your thought you wanted to get off your mind.
Okay, I will try to be very synthetic, okay? Let's never forget that when you read Plato, it's always a dynamic reality, okay? Nothing is frozen. And when he was speaking of soul, it was dynamic. You can move on the epistemological journey. However, you have to be aware that there is an epistemological journey first. Okay, so second, and that second remark is more on the down-to-earth reality. Of course, that there are people who are born with more advantages in terms of wealth and power. Of course, they tend to create a close oligarchy, meaning that it will stay within their families and their allies. But here, when we speak about aristocracy, plutocracy, or democracy, I just want you to remember two words. It's dynamic, meaning that we can move up or down, and it's open, okay? Everyone is invited to the epistemological journey. And the first condition to start your epistemological journey is that you're aware that there is an epistemological journey. I stop here for now.
Oh, that's good. That's it. It's like more than half the battle, it seems, just being aware that this journey exists.
Yeah.
All right. Let's jump in and continue this once again. Madison, you having fun there reading, or do you want to pass on the baton?
It's Macy. But,
Macy, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Hey.
Okay. I'm cool with going for one more, and then I can call it quits on that.
Thank you, Macy.
Yeah, no worries.
You read at a nice pace, Macy.
Oh, thanks. Because I don't know what I'm saying. Okay.
No,
the-
I'm an old guy. My concentration levels have slowed down a bit. That's all.
The armies of the Academy. For 15 years following his second return from the court of the Dionysi, Plato led his military and political forces in a dramatic strategic battle that spanned the Mediterranean from Syracuse to Egypt and Asia Minor. Persia control of the Greek mainland was slipping. The trouble was brewing in the empire's western satrapies. With every foreign policy failure, Persian king Artaxerxes fell into greater disgrace with his sponsors in the ancient Mesopotamian oligarchy, who were poised to overthrow him if his blunders should jeopardize their looting rights across the Mediterranean world. The Academy took advantage of every tactical opening. In 370 BC, the Persian-controlled alliance among Thebes, Athens, and Argos broke down. This alliance, which had been directed against the city-state of Sparta, had served as the enforcer of Persian policy on the Greek mainland for more than 2 decades. Its dissolution opened the way for a new Athenian-Spartan alliance, which the Academy encouraged. Anxious to avoid this, King Artaxerxes summoned the leaders of the pro-Persian factions of all the major contenders to Susa for negotiations. Artaxerxes sought to establish a new king's peace, modeled on the 387 BC peace of Antalcides, which had made Greece a virtual satrapy of the empire. But it soon became clear that Thebes, the crucial component of Persian military presence on the Greek mainland, would not grant the demands of Athens and Argos. The negotiations broke down, and the king, with little other choice, backed Thebes. The failure of the negotiations devastated the reputations of the pro-Persian leaders of all the Greek cities, who came home empty-handed. At Antalcides, the Spartan representative, retired in disgrace. His Athenian counterpart committed suicide. The Persian factions were pushed into the background of Greek political life, and the reemergence of the enemies of Persia soon allowed Athens and Sparta, warring enemies for more than 50 years, to form a new alliance and declare a common front against Thebes. The political intervention of the Academy and its friends in Sparta was crucial to the formation of the new pact, and when Athenian soldiers gathered in 369 BC to join Spartan troops for a new military offensive against Persia, they camped on the playing fields of Plato's Academy. While faced with the collapse of its divide and conquer policy against the Greek city-states, Persia ran into trouble on a second front. One after another, the empire's territories sparked into rebellion against Artaxerxes, creating a series of conflicts lasting from 366 to 360 BC and known as the Satraps' Revolt. The revolt of the satraps may have been the last straw for the Mesopotamian priests who controlled Artaxerxes' throne and expected him to keep order in his territories. It is possible that at this point, the priests of the Temple of Marduk conceived a new program to protect their centuries-old looting operations in the Mediterranean. Artaxerxes might be allowed continued rule over the Middle East he had already plundered and destroyed, but Persia's satrapies in Asia Minor, Egypt, and the rest of the Greek world would be broken free of the empire and placed under the control of a nominally independent Greek figurehead, whose allegiance to the Marduk priesthood would be guaranteed by the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. It was precisely this scheme, in effect a plan to set up a western division of the Persian Empire, which was attempted 30 years later through Philip of Macedon, who disguised it as a campaign to liberate Greece from Persia. This plan was foiled by the assassination of Philip, perhaps at the hands of the priests of the Temple of Ammon, who placed his son Alexander on the Macedonian throne. Alexander, soon recognized as a true enemy of the Marduk oligarchy, undertook a campaign across the known world to destroy it. The Mesopotamian priests may well have conceived the Western Division, the scheme at this time, as a means to use the satraps' revolt to reassert their control over the Mediterranean. There is no
just one thing. Your reading is so good. The only one thing it's going to come up again is Macedonian is with the smooth C, not the K.
Where?
Whenever the Macedon, so it's not Macedon, it's Macedon.
I see. Macedon. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's actually
It's
Macedonia.
Macedonia.
Macedonia. My bad.
Now it's going to
Yeah,
be
no,
perfect.
but
Great.
Macy,
Here's the funny part about language. The funny
Yeah.
part about language, because I'm reminded of this having one of the recent president, I think a New Year's Day present or something like that, is a packet of macadamia nuts.
Oh.
Oh,
yes,
right.
So I mean,
that's
if you put the two words together, they're spelled slightly differently, but you know it's very easy to confuse the pronunciation of them. But it is
Yeah.
Macedonia.
but Macy, it's very easy. Next time you just say that you pronounce like a Greek person. That's all.
There you go.
Okay. Where were we?
Oh, right. Sorry, I totally derailed that. It's right here.
That
Okay.
just makes me want to say one more time, Philip of Macedon,
Macedon.
because now Paul has macadamia nuts stuck in my head.
Oh,
Macedonian.
Yeah, we're gonna have to say it like 10 times fast now.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll barrack for the macadamia nuts. They're very tasty.
Stop saying macadamia.
Yeah, stop saying that. Stop saying that.
Okay.
Macedonian.
Continuing on. There is no doubt that Plato and his allies also intervened in the revolt. As the satraps' revolt gained momentum, the forces of the academy sought to turn it to their strategic advantage by organizing the rebels and the Greeks into united action against the oligarchy. Agesilaus, who had been tied down at home for 30 years by Persian instigated wars against Sparta, was freed by the new alliance between Athens and Sparta to focus his energies on his lifelong ambition, the destruction of Persia. He first met with Ariobarzanes.
sure.
Is that right?
I would.
The trap of What is
Phrygia.
this? Phrygia.
Yeah.
And negotiated an alliance with Sparta against the empire. At the same time, Eudoxus, Plato's second in command, brought Mausolus, the satrap of nearby Caria, into the rebellion. This formidable configuration was soon joined by what's that?
Probably Datames.
Datames, satrap of help me.
Cappadocia?
Cappadocia, who had
Cappadocia.
Cappadocia. Oh, that was counterintuitive. Okay, Cappadocia.
Or Cappadocia.
Who had earlier been assigned by Artaxerxes to put down the satrapal rebellion in Egypt, supported by the Ammon priesthood.
All right, let's just quickly take in this little map. I love these little maps spliced in. Satraps revolt. So for those 6 years, 366 to 360. In revolt in 361, we find basically a recapitulation of what you just said. The Ariobarzanes, satrap of Cappadocia and commander of Persian forces in Syria. Orontes, satrap of Armenia, son-in-law of Artaxerxes. Oh, awkward family reunion there. Mausolus, tyrant of Caria. Tycho, pharaoh of Egypt. Joining with him were Spartans under Agesilaus and Athenians under Chabrias. Cities in Ionia, Lydia, and Syria as well joined into the fun. So that's a lot of disruptions to the empire all at once. Interesting.
I have a question. What's a satrap?
Sort of like
a provincial governor.
A provincial governor.
That's sort of beholden to a higher power that they have to be responsive to. Yeah.
And they're the ones who were revolting.
Yeah.
Well, if you know the history of royal families, most of the time it's your brothers and your cousins who are a pain in your neck.
Thank you.
Or would the term vassal state be a good comparison?
No, because they were truly provinces of the Persian Empire. Okay, like Sicily or North Africa or Spain or France were provinces of the Roman Empire.
Well,
they were directly administered.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, Quan. I had always been thinking of them much more synonymously, like Susie did. So okay, there's
some of them, like Armenia, might have some internal autonomy, but most of them were directly controlled by a governor named by the emperor.
Okay. Sweet.
I don't know if it's necessary for anybody else, but just to bring that into view a little bit more. So like the way I've learned or thought of a vassal state, they may independently govern themselves, but they have to pay tribute.
Exactly.
This,
A modern example would be Japan to the United States. Okay, Japan is sovereign inside Japan. Okay, the term sovereign inside means autonomous. But concerning foreign policy, Japan is not sovereign. That's exactly a vassal state.
Cool. Onward.
In 362 BC, Orontes, the son-in-law of the great king Artaxerxes, joined the revolt and was accorded pride of place as the ranking Persian among the rebels. The other satraps transferred much of their treasury to him and recognized their armies for an all-out assault on Persia. Events on the Greek mainland also turned against Persia. In 362 BC, Epaminondas,
Close enough.
the leader of the Theban sacred band, was killed at the Battle of
Mantinea.
where Thebes was pitted against a Spartan-Athenian Argive alliance. Although the Spartans and their allies lost the battle, the loss of its leading general marked the beginning of the end for Thebes and its sacred band Kamikaze. In 361 BC, the Greek armies prepared to intervene in the satraps' revolt from yet another flank, Egypt, where Pharaoh Nectanebo okay, the first had recently declared his nation's independence from Persia. In the Egyptian theater of operations, we see at work every element of the alliance masterminded by the Academy. From Sparta came King Agesilaus, anxious to win the victory over Persia. Bribery and subversion had cost him 33 years before. Serving as his agent was Eudoxus, who probably aided in coordinating Sparta's deployment with the Athenian forces. These were led by Chabrias, a pupil of the Academy, the most outstanding 4th century BC Athenian general, and an architect of the revolt. The priesthood of Ammon certainly had a hand in both Nectanebo's revolt from Persia and in the strengthening of the Egyptian-Greek alliance. Ammon's sister temple, the oracle of Zeus at Dodona, had openly sided with Sparta against Delphi-backed Thebes since 368 BC. The Academy's plan was to gather Spartan, Athenian, and Egyptian forces in Egypt, travel to Asia Minor to join with the satrapal Persian forces under Datames, forces ironically levied on Artaxerxes' orders to crush the Egyptian revolt, and spearhead the wall of armies to move against Persia from across Asia Minor.
Cool.
Just 20 seconds.
Sure.
At that time, the temples make me think about the modern think tanks, okay, because they play about the same role. They gave great plan, great strategies, and at the same time, they spin propaganda and mythology to justify their own side.
Yeah, right. They're like the Rand corporations of the ancient time, eh?
Absolutely. The Delphi temple was the Rand corporation of 24 centuries ago.
Love it.
Yeah.
Great concept.
Great little piece of information, that one.
Yeah.
Are we okay if I keep going, or do we want?
If you're enjoying the ride, if you're liking this, keep it going. I know you said that you sometimes have a difficult time following when you read, but you're reading so well. I'm enjoying it.
Okay, I'll keep going.
Okay.
Final journey.
Stamina.
I feel like practice makes perfect. So,
Yes.
final journey to Syracuse. While the armies of the Academy gathered in Egypt for what they hoped would be the final assault on the Persian oligarchy, Plato undertook his last mission to Syracuse. He was 67 years old and extremely reluctant to make the voyage. It meant surrendering day-to-day leadership of the Academy allied forces in the satraps' revolt, and Plato had little expectation of success. But he was compelled to go. Despite his personal disgust with Dionysius II, trusted intelligence sources in Syracuse told him there was a chance to win the tyrant to the anti-oligarchist cause in this, its most crucial hour. Since Plato's last visit, Dionysius's policy toward the anti-Persian faction in Greece had been checkered at best. Within 1 year after Plato's departure, the Syracusan monarch made an enormous contribution to the Apollo cult at Delphi, whether to mollify the priests for his previous collaboration with their what is it?
Arch enemy?
Arch enemy, Plato, as payment for operations against his exiled rival Dion, or for some other reason we do not know. However, at the same time, Dionysius provided military aid to Sparta for defense against Thebes, even though he was tied down for several years by the renewed Carthaginian War. Now Dionysius sent word to Plato that he had abandoned the wayward exploits of his youth and wished to devote himself to the policy that the great philosopher had recommended to him 20 years earlier. Despite Plato's misgivings, the agents of his collaborator, what's this one?
Archytas
in Syracuse urged that he return, assuring him that change might still be effected at the court. The vicissitudes of Satrap's role demanded that Plato take this chance, however remote. If Dionysius would step forward on behalf of the Greek offensive, the Mesopotamian priesthood's Western division plan could be crushed. Plato was also gravely concerned for the position of his friend Dion, who had lived in exile from Syracuse for 5 years. Dionysius had offered to negotiate Dion's affairs in Syracuse if and only if Plato personally rejoined his court. Coupled with this offer was a threat that if Plato refused, Dionysius would sell Dion's estate and marry his wife to a courtier. Oof. Hoping to aid both the satrap's revolt and Dion, Plato arrived in Syracuse. But he immediately found that his worst fears had been justified. Once in the city, he was virtually taken captive. As he described it, he was a caged bird held in the Syracusan Acropolis under military guard and let out only for daily philosophical discussions with Dionysius. Plato feared even to ask for his release, but when he learned that members of his bodyguard were talking of assassinating him, he managed to send for help from his old friend Archytas. As swiftly as possible, Archytas dispatched state warships to Syracuse, bearing messengers conveying the League of Tarentum's official demand for Plato's release. This secured Plato's freedom, and he returned to Athens. An incensed Dionysius immediately sold Dion's property, and remarried his wife. A year after Plato's return to Athens, the satrap's revolt collapsed. The crescent of armies the Academy had assembled in Asia Minor for a final assault on the Persians was disbanded. Why? Persian political sabotage against military force, otherwise guaranteed of success, clearly played a role in the collapse. And indeed, the final blow to the operation was the defection of the satrap Orontes to the side of Artaxerxes, bringing with him half of the satrapal war chest. The Asia Minor offensive had suffered a crippling setback in 361 BC when the Spartan king Agesilaus dropped preparations to move his army from Egypt to join the rebel forces. Instead, Agesilaus stayed behind in Egypt and militarily supported a rebellion by the Egyptian noblemen. What is this?
Juan, you go.
Nekha-Hebi.
Nekha-Hebi, against the successor to Nectanebo the first, who had died several months earlier. Not only did Agesilaus' intervention into the succession cost the satrap's revolt the support of the Spartan army, but it pulled the troops of Nectanebo's successor from the side of the other armies in Asia Minor, as the Egyptian pharaoh rushed home to defend his throne. As a consequence of the departure of the Egyptian army, Datames withdrew his forces and the revolt collapsed. How much had Plato's third failure to enlist the aid of the house of Dionysus dampened the Academy's expectations for success against the Persians? What page am I on? 43. Sorry. Why did Plato suddenly shift the theater of his strategic operations away from Asia Minor to Egypt, dealing the final blow to the anti-Persian military offensive by tying up the Egyptian army and Agesilaus in a civil war? Perhaps the Academy perceived a Western division of the Persian Empire option behind the satrap's revolt and moved to collapse it. Or was the installation of Agesilaus' candidate Nekharhebi on the Egyptian throne rearguard
yeah,
victory for the Academy, which perhaps doubted the outcome of the Asia Minor campaign and resolved to preserve Egypt as an anti-Persian bastion? We cannot now answer these questions with certainty. We do know that the fight to enthrone Nekharhebi, who took the name Nectanebo II, was the Spartan king's last hurrah. Now over 70 years old, Agesilaus died within the year in Egypt, never again to see his native Sparta or carry out his pledge to destroy Persia. We do know, however, that Agesilaus' pharaoh, Nectanebo II, was to be remembered by the priests of Zeus Ammon at Siwa as their defender during the bitter days of Persia reconquest. One day, the Ammon priests would guide, nurture, and then bring into their country a man who would fulfill the ambitions of Agesilaus in freeing Egypt from Persia's domination. Alexander the Great, asked to explain to the Egyptian people who this great liberator was, Alexander's soldiers gave the simple answer: he is the son of Nectanebo.
Little foreshadowing there.
Am I good to stop there?
It's all up to you. We're going on volunteerism today. Okay. You're good?
Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay. All right. Who wants to pick it up? I know Paul's smiling. He's like, he could feel it coming on. Anybody else, though? Paul, I know, needs a break sometimes. I know he appreciates it.
Yeah, no, I had a late night last night out listening to some very good music. So I'm a little bit like you, awake, but, not quite as awake as normal.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll read it if you want me to.
Do it.
Yeah, go, Susan.
War against Delphi. Had Plato even a trace of the defeatism and scholasticism attributed to him, his story would end here. As a young man in Egypt, he had seen Agesilaus's great 396 BC invasion of Persia destroyed, and his native Greece plunged into incessant war. In Syracuse, he had guided Dionysius I in a city-building campaign whose goal was the extinction of the Persian-controlled Delphic oracle of Apollo. But the Syracusan tyrant had proven smaller than Plato's design and sold him into slavery. Later, renewed hope for Syracuse foundered on the personal weakness of the tyrant's son, Dionysius II. Finally, in the most formidable military campaign of Plato's life, the Academy organized a wall of armies in Asia Minor to destroy the old enemy Artaxerxes, but its years of work guiding the satrap's revolt against Persia failed. The story does not end here, however. Plato once again reformulated his global strategic design. After 3 attempts that had cost him his liberty and nearly his life, Plato set the Academy's sights once again on the conquest of Syracuse. Repeated efforts to win that dynasty for the anti-oligarchist cause had failed. Now it would have to be destroyed. Beginning in 357 BC, the Academy directed all its resources into a 2-pronged military campaign. The targets were Syracuse, to be seized by Plato's ally Dion and established as a command center for operations against Persia, and the Oracle of Apollo at Delphi, to be destroyed by the forces of the native population of Phocis with aid from Sparta. Dion had been prepared at Plato's side for a leading role in such an offensive. Since his exile from Syracuse, Dion had lived in Athens as a member of the Academy. He had become one of Plato's leading associates and established a memorable friendship with Plato's nephew, Speusippus, who was to lead the Academy following his uncle's death. Does anybody have a better pronunciation for that?
Nope.
Okay, Speusippus had been charged with a special assignment on Dion's behalf, that of developing in him the crucial leadership qualities of laughter and warmth. Speusippus, known as the best wit in the Academy and a constant source of excellent jokes and laughter, gave Dion a course in the science of humor at the Academy's own drinking parties and in the Athenian social life. In 357 BC, Dion launched his campaign to seize power in Syracuse. Intelligence reports from Speusippus, who had slipped into Syracuse during Plato's last visit of 361 to 360 BC, indicated that the city's population was ripe for rebellion. Speusippus had established ties with Dionysius II's opposition, who were to represent Dion's base of support once his military operations were underway. In the meanwhile, Dion contacted other Syracusan exiles and encouraged them to join him. Few, however, were willing to risk their lives in a military offensive against the powerful Dionysius, as Plutarch notes in his life of Dion. Their total strength was less than 800, but these were all men of some note who had gained a reputation from their service in many great campaigns. They were in superb physical condition. For experience and daring, they had no equals in the world, and they were fully capable of rousing and inspiring to action the thousands whom Dion expected to rally to him in Sicily. When these men learned that the expedition was directed against Dionysius in Sicily, they were at first dismayed and condemned the whole enterprise. But then Dion addressed them, explaining in detail the weakness and rottenness of Dionysius' regime, and announced that he was taking them not merely as fighting troops, but as leaders of the Syracusans and the rest of the Sicilians who had long been ripe for rebellion. Dion won the confidence and steadied the resolve of his exile allies and the mercenaries under his command with his appeal to their leadership abilities. Plato was too old to participate, having turned 70 the year Dion opened his drive for Syracuse. For the first time, the operations would be coordinated from the Academy by Speusippus. The success of the mission rode on Dion's leadership abilities and the intelligence assays of Speusippus, who believed that the mass of Sicilians would rally to the Academy's program. The mere 800 soldiers, crowded into 5 ships, would have made a very sorry showing even as pirates against the estimated 80 warships and innumerable foot soldiers of Dionysus. Dion's design for the capture of Syracuse, however, was also supported by Carthage and the southern Italian city-states in the League of Tarentum. Dion eluded the Syracusan navy and led his ships past Sicily to dock in Carthage on the northern coast of Africa. He had sustained ties with these ancient Phoenician colonists ever since his days as virtual regent in Dionysius' court. This people later earned their fame as the only serious challengers to the Roman Empire, the oligarchist successors to Persia during the First and Second Punic Wars. When he completed negotiations with the Carthaginians, Dion sailed for Manoa the port of Acragas, a town in western Sicily controlled by Carthage. Cinelus, the head of the Carthaginian legions in Minoa, was an old friend of Dion's. From this haven, Dion recruited an army of several thousand Sicilians eager to be rid of the hated regime of Dionysius. Dion and his troops set out for Syracuse after receiving word from his intelligence networks that Dionysius was on campaign in southern Italy with most of his warships. Gathering strength as he marched across the island, Dion reached Syracuse without a single encounter. At the gates of the city, a grateful citizenry welcomed him as their liberator and fell upon Dionysius' guards and informants. Dionysius, who had returned to the city in the meantime, retreated to the Syracusan Acropolis. A false offer to negotiate with Dion failed to improve his position, and it seemed only a matter of time before Dion would become master of Syracuse. Dionysius was barricaded into the citadel of the city and could not hold out long. The academy then launched phase 2 of its operation, the attack on Delphi. This struggle, known as the Sacred War, was the fulfillment of a plan conceived 30 years before by Plato for the destruction of Delphi at the hands of the elder Dionysius. In 356 BC, the inhabitants of Delphi revolted against the Persian-controlled cult in their midst. Led by a resourceful citizen named Philomelus, they seized the temple of Apollo and its immense deposits of gold. This gold was used to fund the struggle against the cult of Apollo for nearly a decade. Supporting the rebellion in Delphi was the new king of Sparta, the successor to Agesilaus. Back in Syracuse, the tyrant Dionysius despaired of military victory. Borrowing a page from Persia's book, he undertook a series of subversion operations against Dion, slandering his challenger in an open letter as an aspiring new tyrant. Despite this appeal to the public superstition, Dionysius' position continued to weaken. Fearing that Dion would soon triumph, Plato's oligarchical enemies brought forward a certain Heraclides, a long-standing hostile infiltrator into the academy, to undermine the drive against the house of Dionysius.
All right, cool. Let's
Heraclides
just
arrived.
quickly take a moment just to look at this little image describing, I would imagine, what we just read. Dion's Syracuse expedition in 357. So it says here, in 357 BC, Plato's collaborator Dion launched his military campaign to seize power from Dionysius II in Syracuse. Dion left Greece for Carthage, where he enlisted the support of his friends and sailed for Minoa, the port of the Carthaginian-controlled city of Acragas in Sicily. After recruiting an army, he marched across the island, gathering strength. When he reached the gates of the city, the Syracusans, who had grown to hate Dionysius, welcomed him as their liberator. So that's nothing new, but the image, I guess, helps to see the geography a bit. All right. That's how Dion took control, and then ultimately was able to actually get control of Delphi. That's a big deal. That's not something you acquire easily in modern history books. That Delphi was actually, at least for a time, defeated.
Yeah, and since we have the map, we can see that Sicily, the western third is the possession of Carthage, and the eastern 2/3 is the possession of Syracuse. So let's say, the small Syracusan empire was about 16,000 square kilometers.
Interesting.
So when you reach Syracuse, it's not just the dot; it's 2/3 of the island.
Yeah, I wonder if we can get an image of that. Well, let's do that afterwards. I'll see if we can get a more big world map of that that configuration. All right.
I lost track of where I was.
Oh, sorry. It's right here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have to make yours bigger. I'm
Oh,
reading
it's
from the.
Heraclides. Oh, Heraclides. Heraclides
Okay, so
arrived in Syracuse.
Heraclides arrived in Syracuse in 356 BC with a small flotilla of warships. On the strength of his navy, he requested and was granted by the Syracusan assembly the rank of admiral, a direct challenge to Dion's authority. Dion reminded the Syracusans that he had already been named commander-in-chief and wrested Heraclides' formal title from him. Heraclides, however, maintained his following by taking over the forced shipbuilding effort mounted by the Syracusans to challenge Dionysius' powerful fleet. Running parallel to Heraclides' wrecking operation was the sudden growth of a Syracusan democratic movement under the leadership of the orator Hippo. Like the democratic parties of mainland Greece, Hippo's movement was made up of desperate peasants set out into the streets against Dion under the banner of land redistribution. Dion rejected land distribution as the likely source of economic and social catastrophe in the future, and upheld Plato's long-standing plan for the reconstruction of the Sicilian cities that had been destroyed in the century-long war with Carthage. This would give the poverty-stricken peasants the opportunity to ring the island with new Syracuses rather than dismantling the old. In 355 BC, Heraclides used his command of the naval contingent to effect Dionysius' escape to southern Italy, from which he would have a free hand to organize and attempt to retake Syracuse. The city's population was enraged. Heraclides and Hippo's Democrats turned their wrath against Dion and expelled him from Syracuse. Dion retreated with his supporters to Locri, a southern Italian city allied with Tarentum. But when Dionysius used the opportunity of Dion's expulsion to retake the city, the population demanded Dion's return as their liberator. After a furious battle, Dionysius was once again expelled, and Dion declared ruler of Syracuse. Less than 1 year later, however, the oligarchs secured by murder what warships and subversive movements could not win them. In 354 BC, Dion was assassinated by Callippus, a former infiltrator of the academy who had hosted Dion during his stay in Athens. Callippus himself seized the government but survived only 1 year of civil war, culminating in the restoration of Dionysius. All we know of Callippus comes from Plato's seventh letter, in which he points to the Eleusinian cult, a mystical spin-off of the Apollo cult at Delphi, as the force behind the murderer's hand. Plato was deeply grieved both at the loss of his friend and the loss of the strategic opportunity represented by Syracuse. In response to the news of Dion's murder, he is said to have written a lament contained in the Greek anthology, which is thus translated by Shelley. Thou wert the morning star among the living, ere thy fair light had fled. Now having died, thou art as Hesperus, giving new splendor to the dead.
Hmm.
The legacy of Dion, or Dion. The legacy of the Dion campaign remains with us today in the form of Plato's dialogue, the Timaeus, written almost certainly during the preparatory period for and during the struggle with Dionysius. It was designed as a training manual for Dion's use in organizing the cadre who would win Syracuse for the academy. It is in this dialogue that Plato's final and highest order formulation of his epistemological method is contained, the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis. In its initial conception, the Timaeus was to be the first of 3 dialogues, to be followed by the Critias, of which Plato completed only a part, and the
Hermocrates?
Okay, Hermocrates, which was never written. The plan, as set forth in the beginning of the Timaeus, is as follows. After a summary of a previous conversation concerning the just state, Socrates, Timaeus, Hermocrates, and Critias resolved to see this state actually exercise its joints and take on the organic life of a real community. This requires that the very laws of motion characterizing the universe first be brought to light, so that the corresponding lawfulness of human society may be disclosed. Wow. This requires that the very laws of motion characterizing the universe first be brought to light, so that the corresponding lawfulness of human society may be disclosed. This task, the natural science component of the inquiry, is given to Timaeus, a citizen of the southern Italy city of Locri, and a Pythagorean in whom we see the figure of Archytas. This done, it was to be the task of Critias, Plato's actual great-grandfather, to receive these laws of motion and display their pertinence in a great story of Athens' prehistoric defense of civilization against the Atlantean Empire. Modern archaeological findings demonstrate that the account of the destruction of an Atlantic basin-wide advanced civilization sketched in the Timaeus reflects a real history lost to us in the days before the volcanic explosion of the island of Thera, 1275 BC, which inundated the Mediterranean. However, the historical reference in the Timaeus, more immediate to Plato's time, consists of complex, twofold allusion to Syracuse and to the Persian Empire. Syracuse, the myth conveys, could either use its glorious civilization and wealth, so like that of the Atlanteans, to destroy the Persian menace, or it could degenerate into a poor man's mockery of Persia through its imperial ambitions and wars of conquest against Carthage. The result, as in the case presented of Atlantis' aggression against Greece, would be a dark ages of impenetrable blackness and unspeakable disaster for mankind. Syracuse had two choices. Regrettably, it took the wrong one, and Plato's predictions of collapse were more than borne out in the dark days of the Roman Empire. We do not have the conclusion to the trilogy, The Contribution of Hermocrates. What could this be, other than a statement of the precise political program by which the just city could be brought into existence? Hermocrates, a relative of Dionysius I, was the Syracusan admiral who defeated the radical Democrat Alcibiades insane Syracusan expedition of 415 BC during the Peloponnesian War. Thucydides records Hermocrates' warnings against the evils of the Athenian Empire, the model of imperial conquest depicted by Critias in his examination of the Atlantis history. In 406 BC, Hermocrates attempted to overthrow the Syracusan tyranny, but failed and was killed. Plato's contemporary readers would naturally see Dion as the fulfillment of Hermocrates' earlier attempt. The fourth guest, whose mysterious absence is reported at the onset of the Timaeus, the person who cannot learn the lessons of Socrates' conversation, represents Dionysius II, whose failure to learn from the Academy's program was the ground for his overthrow. Plato never completed the Critias and never wrote the Hermocrates. The reason is most likely the obvious one. Learning of Dion's death and the collapse of the Syracusan assault, he turned his mind to other theaters of operation. Plato did not write for future generations wistfully yearned after, even though we are in every way the beneficiaries of his work, but for the all-consuming immediate task of toppling the oligarchy in his own time. Therefore, however sadly, he laid his pen down on the Critias and recast the notes for Hermocrates in the form of the laws.
Hmm.
In the laws, the political program planned for in Hermocrates is broadly presented. Laws is the fullest elaboration of Plato's second best state, the program called for in the Statesman dialogue. A few years later, in 347 BC, Plato, now 80 years of age. Wow, wasn't it really rather unusual at that time to live that long?
Probably.
A few years later, in 347 BC, Plato, now 80 years of age, was to die. In the interim, the Academy's stand against Delphi, the sacred war, was also to be defeated by a Persian-backed Theban alliance. The story of Plato's life and struggle would not be completed without a brief reference to the future career of a boy, 8 years old when Plato died, who was to accomplish the program of the Academy and carry out the destruction of Persia, Alexander the Great. We know that in the decade after Plato's death, the Academy's agents, in league with the priests of the oracle of Zeus Ammon, recruited the young Alexander to carry out the work of Agesilaus. Alexander, history records, was won to this program through the embassy of Delius at Ephesus, a student of the Academy. Throughout his career, he was to rely on Plato's students for his guidance in the extraordinary feat, not only of conquering, but rebuilding Persia as a humanist empire founded on Greek culture. In this program, Alexander followed almost to the letter the outline of another student of Socrates, Xenophon. The organization of Alexander's city-building program follows the course of Xenophon's great, sadly overlooked Cyropaedia, The Education of Cyrus. Xenophon's work, often described either as history or a fantasy, was neither. It was a political program for the establishment of a Greek-cultured monarch on the Persian throne. It is the program for which Xenophon fought alongside Cyrus the Younger, not the hero of the Cyropaedia, and alongside Agesilaus. We can be sure that together with that other great account of an expedition into Asia, the Iliad of Homer, and the dialogues of Plato, it was never far from Alexander's side. Alexander did not have complete success in finishing off the oligarchy, which arranged for his tragic murder and the destruction of his empire. But through the cities which he built and through his education of the peoples of Asia Minor and Egypt in the classical Greek culture of Homer, Aeschylus, and Plato, now become a worldwide human culture. He preserved for later generations the basis upon which to continue the struggle for civilization. We have been through the wars Plato and his colleagues waged. We have seen under what circumstances his great dialogues were written, and to what end. It now falls to us to use these great tools of reason to continue Plato's struggle and destroy the oligarchy to whose extinction he dedicated his life.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Very enjoyable.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Good Lord. That was fantastic.
It's a very opposite picture from what's typically painted of Plato.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the polar opposite to the extreme, eh?
Yes.
Uh,
It's kind of mind-boggling.
mm-hmm.
Just to be clear, the author no longer with us. I mean, this was written a long time ago.
I don't know if he's alive or not. I don't know anything else he did except for this incredible piece of work. We should poke around and see what he's up to if
Yeah.
he's still alive.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
definitely
I
want to
always-
read much more of his research, though. That's for sure.
I
What is
always,
what's the author's name? Sorry.
Charles Tate.
all right.
Turtle
Charles
Tate?
Tate. Yeah.
Charles Tate. Yeah.
Charles Tate.
I
Right at
always
the bottom
thought
of
this
the article.
Plato's Academy was just a school of just intellectual kind of people learning stuff, but it was so much
Yeah.
more. You
Yeah.
know, a think tank. It was like they're behind like great reforms of that time.
Yep. Hey,
I
Ken?
never thought.
Yeah, no, me
That was-
neither. It's most people haven't. It's there's a lot of work that's been put into obscuring this reality. Ken, I see you raising your digital hand.
Yeah, hi. I joined late into the party here, but I'm really glad I caught this third act of this wonderful presentation. So just to catch up, I think it was our Australian colleague who was talking about his ignorance of the Punic Wars and the whole business with Carthage and so forth. And I wanted to recommend to him a book that had just recently come into my possession, which because I was also very ignorant of it and very curious. It's Hannibal by Patrick N. Hunt, and it gives the complete rundown of history, sort of from the Carthaginian side, and it's very, very revealing. So I just highly recommend it. Okay. The
Put it
second,
into the chat.
sorry. Oh, okay.
Write
I
it
will.
into the chat. Yeah.
I
Title
shall.
and author.
I shall. Okay.
Thanks.
I just want to make two observations based on what we heard tonight. The first is to reflect what the previous speaker just had to say, because I too, despite having studied philosophy in college, really thought that the academy was, simply an ivory towerish sort of think tank that just, perorated here and there on this and that issue. But to find out that it's actually the theoretical end of a very politically active group of people is fascinating and educational in and of itself. And I really appreciate this piece for bringing that to light. It's unbelievable. And, Plato being sold into slavery and the whole business, it's unbelievable. I had no idea. My third observation has to do with this part that we just heard about. I can't remember the name of the individual. I guess it was Dion, but he was trained in humor. And, we don't often think about humor as being a requirement for a leader, but I certainly think it goes a long way. And I'm fascinated. I don't know if this was done under official academic auspices or whether
Probably more informal. I would imagine it was more the cultural atmosphere within the academy. Had a sort of a loose but rigorous vibe.
But just to go back to my previous point, when we use the term academic in common parlance, we mean something that has no practical application. And it's ironic that it was totally practical what they were doing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, good points. Yeah, no, I know. It's and the fact that the money that was used to buy him out of slavery, that his captors for whatever reason they felt too ashamed to accept that money, so he was able to use that to fund bankroll the academy to begin with. No, extraordinary stuff. And yeah, on that issue of humor too, Ben Franklin, right? If you look at another modern grand orchestrator, hilarious guy. He's so funny. I've been reading his essays, and he's just like this master joke teller, and he's able to use this fun factor to just navigate through environments that if you were like too rigid or literal, you'd be destroyed. It's really a power. It's
Cool.
Interesting, Matt, because my immediate image of Benjamin Franklin, whenever he comes to mind, is a man with a smile on his face.
Yeah.
And I would say that the majority of pictures that I've framed that image in my own mind, the ones that I've seen over the years, would be of a man that has a slight grin.
Yeah. Well, and he
Yeah.
largely also infiltrated. I mean, that was part of it too, right? And the sort of more modern expression of the cult of Delphi was, I'm quite certain, the Hellfire Club. That was the 17th century or the 18th century cult of Delphi, or its central command post. And he was able to use this power and really infiltrate it to the point that they've gone out of their way to really try to rebrand Ben Franklin as this whorish child sacrificing, goon who made the American Revolution on behalf of his master Hellfire Club Illuminati members. It's like totally lazy, but one can understand where that would come from, right? Because again, counterintelligence, it's requires some humor.
Yeah. Well, intelligence is counterintelligence is much more in spinning a mythology to portray your enemies as an ogre or a baby eating person precisely, and not human. And it's spying is not the banal image of someone trying to get information from you, but rather to impose information in your mind.
Right. Yo, Monty.
Yes, I was particularly impressed. As a matter of fact, Susan read this this paragraph twice, where it was and in reference to your idea about the accomplishments. In other words, the strategy and epistemology. And I was very impressed by not just the reference to the geometry and the Platonic solids, but this reference was brought in about the motion of the galaxies of the universe. In other words, a whole new idea was brought into this, insofar as the means by which they were doing strategy and operationals and tactics, insofar as their war in this regard. And I was wondering if anyone would have any little more insight into what he's referencing insofar as the motion of the galaxies, insofar as this higher level science, it appears.
Are you speaking of the Timaeus?
Yes. Yeah, that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, okay. Well, did you read the Timaeus, Monty?
No, I did not.
Okay. Well, I would say that there are many things in the Timaeus, but I would say that in the Timaeus, Plato was trying to make the distinction between the higher principle of beauty, goodness, and truth, and the notion that is shared by many schools in ancient times, which is the notion of the demi-orgos. Okay, that's in English is the demi-urge, meaning the architect of the universe. But that is not the main point of the Timaeus. The Timaeus is much more about the higher principle at the basis of the universe. But as is written here, it also has a more practical implication in terms of political action too. Okay, we were speaking of the temples as a think tank, but the academy was kind of a think tank too.
Yeah. There's good think tanks as well. I mean, I never thought of the Timaeus as necessarily having a literal direct political effect in the conventional sense of the term, as I see it with like the Laws or Republic or so many of the other dialogues. But it's I guess, yeah. But it really is like because what I was thinking of it was a way anybody who works through it, like really works through it, will be somebody who you will be able to generally trust their judgment, and because to really work through it and not just read it requires building up the Pythagorean monochord, following him in terms of the divisions of the 2/3, the sesquialterate, sesquitertiate, like 2/3, 3/4, the 8/9, 9/10, the the semi-major, semi-minor, intervals on the string to sort of get a sense of the geometry of harmonics. You have to think about then also the nature of astrophysics as much as it could be known in terms of the theory of like the nesting of the solids, how the nesting of the solids has a relationship to the positions and purpose also of the planets, as far as, and seeing the idea of all of this organized around a composer, a unified mind, which is both three and one at the same time, which is both good, loving, and reasonable, which made us in that image. So all of these concepts are going to be things that you discover through doing the work and doing the geometry and building up and following the doubling of the cube, which is part of the process within it, which is the Archytas thing. Like you have to figure out what like square numbers are, what cube numbers are, what's the relationship of the cube and the square, right? All of these things are things he expects the students to explore. And again, if you really do it, you can't be the same person you were before you did it. And then you could be somebody who could be trusted to be put into a situation of Byzantine high strategy. Whereas if you didn't, you might be a good person, but you can't really be trusted to take a leadership position or make judgments that might get everybody killed.
Absolutely. To say it in a shorter manner, it was a penetration between time and timelessness, because he was talking about the nature, the property of the universe, but also of its structure and of its purposes. So the notions of intention and purposes were much more about the timeless dimension of reality, and the more practical architectural manifestation were more of the time dimension. As you said, if you're not rooted in timelessness, you would probably be led down the primrose path in the time dimension.
Yeah, I would even add in the Timaeus, and I put an article in the chat because I actually know somebody who's quite an expert on that. He wrote a really great article on it, so I put it in the chat. But I mean, technically, yeah, Plato does a lot in that dialogue, right? He talks about the ideal city, but seeing it in motion. So very much, he's laid out all these different principles and virtues and maxims in the different books, and why these things are essential. And he's talking about like, how do we see these? What does all this look like when it's in motion? Which is cool. But in doing so, I mean, it goes all over the place. But he has intimations of Leibniz's least action principle, least time, when he's talking about how the universe would have been formed, right? According to like what idea? He said, if the creator, surely it must be the best or most beautiful of works, given like if the creator had the choice between making a less beautiful or more beautiful, he would make it the most beautiful. And if he had to make it the most rational or less rational, he'd make it the most rational possible. And that's what then kicks off him, taking out the proportions and like according to what proportions and would it be formed, which fall into the musical scales and formation of the universe. But then from the macro, he even goes down into the micro, right? He does anticipate atomic physics when the way he's, playfully talking about vibrating triangles and these things, he's saying there's got to be something in motion, and there has to be a sort of geometric principle, i.e. beauty, governing these things, even at their smallest level. Like it definitely is one of the most formidable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thought that kind of just popped in my head from that was the fact that even water molecules carry a frequency, and metallic elements have apparently different frequencies. So me and my family were kind of talking about this the other day in the car, but when you're listening to a live symphony versus just listening to one maybe in your earbud or over a speaker, when you're in the building with all these people and you're listening to a like live symphony, it's the strings that are made out of metal or like or wood, or the trumpets that are made out of, again, a material, it has its own frequency, and when it reaches you, we remember that we're also made out of water, and we're made out of iron, and we're made out of all of these materials. And so when it hits you, it's almost like it penetrates you, and it starts resonating with you. So it was just something that popped in my head.
That's fascinating. That's a great
Yeah,
concept.
sure. Most definitely.
It's true. I like the idea of digital samples that we pick up on an MP3. It's enjoyable, and it's certainly good to listen to great music. If if you can't go to a physical symphony, it's great to be able to listen to it on your headset. But at the same time, what you just said, it's very powerful. There's a quality, a subtle quality that
Qualitatively different. Yes.
yeah, Courtney.
I was going to say, well, they know that, the frequency has different impact, right? When they change the frequency to 440 from, was it 332, I think it was. But like one is very healing and one is not, it's the opposite. It can be very harmful.
Yeah.
And they've also shown that music, but not just music, actually all art has the power to impact on a cellular level, actually change cells. So yeah, it's very, and I think what you're saying about the water is it probably a huge component because yeah, they've done also it was a Emoto, I think the Japanese study that they did on the water and the crystal formations of the water, and they showed that water actually had memory also.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's all tied in, but fascinating.
Yeah, I think it was a theory where it was you could use hydraulics, almost like because how were the pyramids made is always definitely a mystery that we're still trying to understand. And a lot of like, how did you lift those heavy blocks? And some of the theories is water, because you're right about the memory carrying aspect of it. So sometimes the theory is like if you tune it to a specific frequency, you can begin to move, and that's very interesting in terms of how almost like in our own bodies when we say like you're feeling a high, you know what I mean, it's almost like it's almost like a rise in frequency. It could attribute to the water level of all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's Victor Schauberger did some interesting work as well on I mean in the 20s and the 30s, but he was doing work on the what he could know. I mean, we didn't have instrumentation that was sensitive enough to necessarily pick up the biophotonics that we now know are also produced and emitted and received in water molecules. But he still had the insight to know that water flowing naturally in river streams and within the Earth's crust has a certain natural flow to it, which is often broken in the rigid geometry of these sharp motions in modern cities and pipes that don't take necessarily into consideration the health of the water itself. And it creates a form of trauma within the water on top of the pollution and other toxins that we're putting into it, of course. But just the motion alone really scrambles a lot of the harmonics within the molecules. And there's some interesting studies in the 80s and the 90s that reviewed, and a lot of technologies exist right now that give water, you could install it in your house, that give it an organic spin, that and also there's some certain quartz crystals which can sort of reset the trauma of the water, which I find fascinating. I haven't studied it extensively, but that they've demonstrated though that there is an increased rate of biophoton activity within the water that has gone through this revitalization process versus water that just comes straight out of your tap and has very few examples of light emissions. So yeah, there's so much going on there.
So I should buy some of Madame Blavatsky's crystals? Is that what you're saying?
That could obviously be
Maybe
taken
not hers.
down the
No.
New Age too, yes.
Yeah, but Dave.
Nassim Haramein, a physicist, he sells some pretty good crystals.
Or maybe that creates demon water.
Maybe.
No,
Who made the crystals?
Yeah, but the essential piece is missing. You don't have the mindset for that.
Ah.
I have a question about, so Quant was talking about the demiurge being referenced in Plato, and this is typically what I do here, is that he was very much a proponent of, I mean, that would be a, you know, long predecessor to kind of a new age, but you know, it's that Luciferian type worldview, or maybe it would be coming out of, emerging from the mystery schools, and that he was trying to recreate a mystery school. That's very much the narrative I typically hear. That seems very like diametrically juxtaposed to what we just read. It doesn't seem like the two would coexist. I'm not saying they couldn't, but it sounds more like, from what we just read, that that he's trying to operate within a covert system of people who do operate under that worldview, and trying to create something that would read. I mean, I know I said it last time, but that's what it looks like, where it looks like a meritocratic system, and which breeds very much. And I know the United States founding fathers were very heavily influenced by the ancient Greeks, and that the whole system of mobility seems like that's what he was trying to afford an opportunity for, that there could be some sort of mobility, that, you know, aristocracy in the sense of excellence didn't have to just mean that you were born into it, or, you know, some sort of ritualized ceremony. And, you know, oftentimes those were very dark, kind of traumatic ritualized processes. I don't know. I mean, it's mind-boggling. Like, I'm still just trying to wrap my head around what we just read, because I've read a lot of Plato. I've read a lot of interpretations of Plato. I've never heard anything like that. And everything I've heard is only antithetical.
Can I?
Yeah.
That's a great
May I
point.
say,
Can I say, okay, you go, Quan, but I really want to, I have a thought that I want to share based on what you just said too, but yeah, go for it, Quan.
no, go ahead, Matt, because I would probably talk for 4 or 5 minutes. So go
Okay,
ahead.
I'll just say, I'll try to be concise. One thing that I've noticed whenever Socrates is self-referring to his daemon,
Yeah,
because that's different from the demiurgos that was referenced
sure.
by Quan in the Timaeus,
Right.
but related. But whenever he refers to his daemon, the one thing that is really uncanny and consistent is that whatever that quality is within his mind, that you know, he's having this back and forth with, or which
Yeah.
compels him onward, is highly conscious, moral, and reasonable. Like, what it is compelling him to do is always to do something which is courageous, moral, and good, and reasonable, which is very
Yeah.
different from the types of characterizations of channelers receiving, you know,
Yeah.
forces of spirit beings from other dimensions, or whatever. You're like, there's so many
Yeah.
different kinds of channelers where there's no expression of anything reasonable that the mind can follow, or moral
Right.
that is pushing it forward. And I'd say it sounds more like my internal dialogue as far as a conscience, when I develop like more and more my capacity to have an internal dialogue, and I'm talking with myself. What is the self that I'm talking to? Who is the I? Such that there's the self that's being examined by the I. Like, it's right there. There already implies that there's like a healthy way. You can be like, oh, that's a split personality syndrome, obviously. But but in a healthy mind, you're constantly having a certain motion. So that's how I'm thinking of. That's just an observation I've had. And the other thing about the demiurgos in the Timaeus is, again, it's characterized by reasonable love. As far as like a creator god, a composer god that created the universe, that demiurgos as a creator, which is the very clear meaning of the word, has these attributes which are, again, totally non-existent in a lot of the descriptions of it from the Nag Hammadi texts. Whenever there's a description of the demiurge or Yaldabaoth or whatever, there's none of these elements that you see very clearly described as attributes within the Timaeus of the creator. So yeah, but I don't know, Quan, if that was, yeah, go for it, dude. Hey.
No, but I think that you have one of the two things that I think was important to stress for our understanding of the Timaeus. Okay, first, let's clarify the meaning of demiurgos in Greek. Okay, because you probably all know the word ergonomy. Okay, while demiurgos and ergonomy have orgos in both of the word. and demiurgus simply mean the worker, the artisan, the craftsman. Okay, so as Matt said, the demiurge or the demiurgus in the Timaeus is a being that is inspired by reason, and being good, he wanted to translate the timeless forms of beauty, goodness, and truth into matter. Okay, so that is the transition between what I call the upper trigram or the timeless dimension and the time dimension, which is submitted to birth, growth, aging, and death. So it is a metaphor or poetic way for Plato to make the connection between the high principle of beauty, goodness, and truth, with it, the high principle of reason, and the action into the time dimension, or in time into the reality of the social political order. So what I call in my fancy expression, the axio-epistemo-political order. And when Charles Tate wrote that the Timaeus has been written for political actions, but rooted in theory, okay? So the axio is the timeless dimension of beauty, goodness, and truth. The epistemo is the epistemological journey to those timeless dimensions. And the political order is precisely the time dimension. And that is the true demiurge of the Timaeus. Okay, why I repeated in my words what Matt said in the first 3 minutes is because, as you said very rightly, Courtney, and I hope that the people listening to us on YouTube will remember that, because the word the demiurge nowadays, when you think or you hear that word, it's related to Gnostic sects or Gnostic sectarian perspective.
Good.
And the demiurge is represented as a lower god, responsible for the material world precisely, okay, for the time dimension, but that supposedly second god or inferior god of the Gnostic sect would be jealous of the infinite God, the true one, and would try to imprison the light or the light from the soul of the people into matter, and would not want them to go to the higher principles of reason. Okay, I think that most people who are addict to YouTube and would watch or binge watch YouTube vids for hours or for days would be mesmerized by that notion of the demiurge, okay, which floods completely the YouTube dimension, which is a part of the time dimension.
Can I just say one thing just to clarify for people? Because when you say to appeal to the higher principles of reason, I think that could be easily confused and conflated by people, because oftentimes when they think of the Gnostic demiurge, it is one that is going to transcend and morph into God through gnosis, through knowledge. So higher reason, I know for Plato, higher reason had a different connotation. He really was, and this is the other thing, this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it's relevant here. Everything's politicized today, and everything is political warfare is done through crafted, managed dialectical narratives typically. And of course they've fed this narrative that Aristotle was the god figure, if you will, of the political right, and Plato is kind of the godfather of communism and of the left. And of course now they've tied, in some ways rightfully so, the left to these ancient Gnostic types of cults and their worldview, we'll say, not necessarily directly to, although in some cases directly. So I think it's important to distinguish, because which is ironic, because it's way more nuanced than that, right? So now we've got this weird kind of inversion going on with politics, which is of course again how the Hegelian dialectic works so effectively. We've got them coming through the right with the social conservative principles, but very much tied to practical applications that are more aligned with things like fascism and in some cases communism. And so there's an attack on this, mystical types of, worldviews. And ironically, there's actually a infiltration that is superimposing it onto the very people who are criticizing it. I know that sounds a little bit confusing. Hopefully you followed what I'm saying there. But I think it's relevant because when you look at the different perspectives of the two, it's way more nuanced because Plato was actually, I mean, I know he didn't have a biblical framework, but he definitely was much more ascribed to a supernatural. And this ties back again to this principle of higher reasoning. It wasn't just higher reasoning within the empirical realm and the physical domain. There was this notion of some sort of an unintelligible realm. This is the whole allegory of the cave, right? So whereas Aristotle was very much, focused on nature, and then everything was derived from nature, and therefore dealing with the empirical, tangible world. So I just wanted to point that out because I think that will get a little confusing for people when you talk about appealing to the higher reason. For Plato, it wasn't what people often think that means today. So
yeah, but I would say that there's a very easy criterion to make the difference between the true teaching of higher reason, or if you want, of the timeless dimension, of the timeless form of beauty, goodness, and truth, is that if it will bring you to more autonomy of your mind capacity, that you are more capable to think by yourself and not to be mesmerized by what people are saying to you, and that you would not go into a sect that would give you a consolation, okay? Because most of the Gnostic or not Gnostic sects would give you a substitute to the reality of your mind development, of the true epistemological journey. And if you are more capable to think by yourself and not seeking validation from others, then that is the absolute difference between a sect and the epistemological journey. Either you go through it by Plato or by others, because Plato is not the only one, but let's say it's one of the major philosopher in the West. That's why we choose to read him. But if you're more capable to be autonomous with your mind processes, that's the absolute criterion. That it is not a sect. But if you need the validation of a group, small, medium, or large, that is quite indicative that you are in a sect.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, well, that's why most of how operations today work and psychological warfare works through Gnostic elects of groups.
Exactly. The notion that they are elects people, that and that you would be given a consolation or a kind of substitute to the reality.
Yeah.
The tactic even has a name: fourth generation warfare.
Well, it has always been the same warfare, okay? Because don't think that the ancient oligarch were dumber than the present day oligarch. I think that it would be the reverse. It has always been a way to capture the talented people coming from the demos by offering them a kind of false illusion of belonging to a kind of elite, which is not entirely fake, okay? Because the talented people from the demos would be attracted by that feeling of being special, and they would be a kind of middle class, okay? If you go back to ancient times, you have the prince or the oligarchs, and you have the demos. And the talented people from the demos would be given some responsibilities, and they wouldn't feel special, and they wouldn't be truly politically special compared to the rest of the demos. And it's the same case today. You have talented people from the demos who are given some rewards to make them a little bit higher than the demos in general. And I would say that the most clever among them are perfectly aware of it, but since the reward is quite shining in their eyes, they accept the exchange.
Yeah, actually, Adam Weishaupt, who's a student, he went to he was a professor of Angelston, and he was a student of the Jesuits. He actually talks about how he modeled the Illuminati off of the Jesuit structure using exactly these principles, because he knew that it was a great way to have lever of power over people. And the thing he added was also that was the reason for the secrecy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And I would just say,
sorry, go ahead, man.
one thing there, Ignatius Loyola in his Meditations, I forget which one, makes a point that Aristotle is who we will follow. Like he's very explicit that Aristotle is the way.
Who is?
Ignatius Loyola.
Okay.
When he wrote his meditations down, his spiritual meditations on far as the guide for all Jesuits to go through as a self-processing or self mentally depatterning exercise that would eventually convince or have us become acceptant that snow is black, or that white is black. Sound familiar, right? If the superior, who is, because the Jesuit superior above us, who's examining us all the time, is closer to God, and thus their desires, even if it seems irrational, must be true because they're a conduit of God, because they're above us. So it's a very hierarchical and a bad way organization.
Right.
And he makes a point that Aristotle is who we will follow.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Ignatius, is he a Catholic saint?
Ignatius Loyola was turned into a saint. Somebody wanted to make him into a cult, but he's the founder of the Jesuits. And and also Bertrand Russell, in his Scientific Outlook in 1930, was also very explicit that Ignatius Loyola went as far as anybody has ever gone in terms of organizing what today is known as the best in his mind of Pavlovian and introspective Freudian psychology that would be used for Tavistock and MK Ultra. But that's Bertrand Russell in 1930 writing this, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was pretty much that.
Yeah.
Can I make a couple quick comments, please?
Oh, hey, yeah, of course, Ken. Yeah, as you see, Ken, it's not the polite hand raising situation.
Yeah, so waiting.
During the classes.
I just
It's
first
pure
of all,
Hobbesian will to power here.
Okay, I just wanted to thank Quan for his really compelling explication of the demiurgus and what it meant to the Socratic understanding. But I wanted to ask you, Matt, would you agree that there's a pretty close correspondence between the Socratic reference to a daemon and the Roman conception of the genius?
I will defer this to Quan.
Okay.
Yes, well, I wouldn't give a very down-to-earth explanation, because in ancient times, you're perfectly right, Ken. I think you must be a reader of ancient times history books. The way you ask the question, I think you already know the answer. Because in ancient times, in the Mediterranean world, people believed that they had a kind of angel guardian, okay? And the Greek would call it a daemon.
Mhm.
And you know that the Greek word daemon simply means a spirit, okay?
Mhm.
And the genius is precisely the Latin equivalent for daemon, okay? The
Mhm.
personal angel guardian of each of us, according to the beliefs of the people of the Mediterranean basin in ancient times.
Okay, thanks.
Cool.
And once again, it depends of your epistemological development, okay? Because what you hear as your internal voices, okay, what is we understand nowadays, psychodynamically speaking, as the internal voices, those internal voices will be interpreted depending on your epistemological development, okay? You
They
can
will be
believe
what? Say that again, Quan. They will be what?
they will be interpreted according to your epistemological development,
Okay.
because someone that is not very developed can interpret internal voices as Satan speaking to him, for example. Okay, it is not excluded. But someone being more advanced epistemologically will understand that that inner voice is coming from his past memory, someone having influenced him, or a complex combination of many influences from the past or influences from the present. And here again, I'm coming back to, I think, the main notion or the main battle of our group, meaning the battle of the mind, okay? Because either oligarchy or aristocracy will prevail will depends if the mind of most people can be uplifted from the democratic level to the aristocratic level, okay? And aristocratic level here, once again,
Something approaching it, yeah.
it's being aware, it's being open, and it's being dynamic, okay? You're not a born aristocrat, it's a journey to
Well,
the
and
aristocratic mind.
self-referential, right?
Yes, exactly. Well,
Yeah.
self-autonomous, okay?
Yeah,
Because once
yeah.
again, to go back to the idea that Courtney brought very brightly, uh, is uh, is your mind a self-autonomous adventure? It's only the depository of any BS that can be put into your mind, okay? Because once again, I talked maybe half an hour ago that spying or the intelligent community, their first job is not to take information from the other. Their first job is to put some BS into your mind. Okay, that's the first job of what is called collectively the intelligence community or whatnot. Or as Ray McGovern would say, the Mickey Mat.
Yeah, Michael Nels has just published a book, highly recommended, with a foreword by Naomi Wolf, called "The Indoctrinated Brain," and he's dealing with the introduction of a foreign operating system into the mind through various, chemical means, the vaccination and so forth, but mostly just getting rid of your own internal dialogue and replacing it with a foreign set of reference.
Absolutely.
And it's very clearly spelled out how the hippocampus works and everything else. So I recommend it to anyone that's interested in the subject.
Yeah, and going back to Plato, I want again to remind everyone the absolute advice by Socrates before he died, okay, in the Phaedo: take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, meaning take care of your capacity to be aware, to be at the light, at the center of your mind, that you know that if there's something in your mind, where is the origin of that something?
Yes.
And is it lawful with beauty, goodness, and truth? And is it your own judgment? Or
Yes.
is it some BS that is put in your mind by others? Or is it yourself validating yourself? Or you are waiting your validation from someone giving you a false impression of belonging to an elite, a fake elite, of course.
Dave?
I was just going to add directly on this point, and going back to the Aristotle thing in this respect, in modern terms, because it really goes back to the battle of Plato's soul versus Aristotle's blank slates, his tabula rasa. And Aristotle's work De Anima on the soul, this is actually admitted, like this was a very important work in the early 20th century, end of the 19th century, in shaping modern psychology around the idea that the soul was this blank slate, and it's the images. It's the images that are really the thing that you're looking to pattern. And because the soul is a blank slate, it's just a question of pattern and repatterning, reflex conditioning. And that's really all education is. And so the idea there is that, man is just an animal, or as today, Hariri would say, a hackable animal, right? So you can just pattern, repattern, reflex condition with additional extra shocks. You can kind of try to repattern the whole thing and just reset it. And so I think that Aristotle, for that reason, has really been one of the high priests. And Bertrand Russell, Huxley in one of his lectures, he was echoing what Russell was saying when they were talking about the view of man and going back to the archaic Greek view before the classical Greek view, echoing Russell, who was saying that we're a bundle of perceptions. Like there's not one thing. They don't like the idea of a soul in the classical sense, a unitary soul, where, like for Plato, right, or as Quanos always reminds us, education is to bring forward. It's something that we're getting people to recall. We're not conditioning or patterning people. We're getting them to bring forward something within themselves which is already there. So that view is completely antithetical to the Aristotelian tabula rasa view. And that initial idea then shapes everything. Like it all starts with how we start our approach there. And that will determine how we think about education, how we think about governing the masses. You know, is it Aristotle's politics and rhetoric, where it's about just kind of shaping the masses and having the best mechanisms of control to keep the different static classes and groups of people, you know, regulated? Or is it Plato's soul, where you're looking to bring forward the best, and those who sort of respond, right, are the ones who are sort of should be elevated?
Yeah, and maybe I want to say too that one of the best way to lie is to give a half truth. Okay. And when Aristotle said that the soul is tabula rasa, well, he was not lying, because he was giving a half truth. Because in the time dimension, what is called in terms of psychodynamics and neurobiology, you can pattern people in terms of creating false memories and things like that. Okay. It's not wrong. It's a half truth. But the other half that he did not give is that there's something that Socrates referred to yourself. And once again, I repeat myself, his last advice is take care of yourself, meaning take care of your inner and autonomous capacity to be aware. That was the other half of the truth that was absolutely essential and vital. And once again, a very good trick to lie is to give a half truth and not to make a plain lie, which is most of the time very weak and very clumsy.
Just in response to that, yeah, it's absolutely the half lie. I mean, if you know anybody who's worked in like psychological warfare in the military, they always say that it's like 90% truth and then 10% lie, or 80-20. And they say that even that lie, quote unquote lie, is often not a lie. It's more about context or emotion, like omission. It's not, you know, a full lie per se. But I wanted to address the tabula rasa because I didn't remember that about Aristotle, and that's such like a pivotal element of what he and what would make him such a useful tool. I think that the way they're trying to spin Plato, this is what I've heard, is when he talks about you know, reflection being like, you know, the epistemology is remembering from it's a reference to something eternal, and not, he didn't really, the way I've heard people interpret it is that it's not, you know, like from within yourself. And it could, I mean, the way they describe it, for even if you take their definition at face value, it could be that, you know, because we do have an eternal being, if we are a soul, then it's not just, you know, here now in the temporal physical realm. But the way they were spinning it, at least some of the people I've heard, was that that meant that he was referencing like a Gnostic type of knowledge, that it's you know, this esoteric knowledge coming from you know, either a demiurge or a I mean, I've heard this so many times, but now I'm thinking about it and I feel like that's a potential misinterpretation intentionally designed to favor this tabula rasa
But
type.
of course, because I gave the first trick to give a good lie, okay, tell the half truth.
Right.
The second trick is you use the concept that have been invented or created by genius like Plato, and you just give a twist to that concept, and
You present the inverse.
exactly, and but it's a variant of giving the half truth rather than the whole truth. Okay, so once again, take care of yourself. Okay, meaning that the epistemological journey is your responsibility. And I maybe I wouldn't have I wouldn't Matt wouldn't trash me after that for this, but if you're too dumb to be mesmerized by the oligarchy, that's too bad for you, because it's your responsibility not to be dumb, precisely.
I wouldn't trash you for that. I mean, it's tough that it's like, who was it who said, Ray McGovern, he said we're not to blame for being born into a messed up world that was unjust, but we're all responsible to correct it. And that comes loaded. I mean, he's a religious person, and I think that helps give him the confidence to say that the way he said it, because he has a sense that we all have a universal quality of reason, of conscience, that God gave us all, regardless of what name we give the creator. But he has this belief in universal reason that's not logic, it's not computer logic, it's more than that. And because he has that faith, he can say something so, what sounds harsh, like we're all responsible to correct it, implying that if we don't, we're somehow thus
responsible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Condemned.
And you know
I think
that
I'll take it further. Condemned is probably how he sees it.
yes, and Plato
in that far, I don't know, but it's definitely not a good thing.
In book 1 of the Republic, since we are talking of Plato, I don't remember at what line exactly, but I think according to the Stephanos pagination is 347a or something like that. If you don't participate in politics, your punishment will be to be ruled by people inferior to you, and too bad for you.
That sounds like condemned.
Yes, it's the condemnation. Okay, because it is a waking up to responsibility. Because once again, it's cause and effect. Okay, if you don't take care of the cause, meaning that you don't take care of yourself, you wouldn't have the effect coming from the fact that you did not take care of yourself. At first at the personal level, and after that at your community level or your collective level.
Yeah.
Here, here.
Here, here.
Wow.
Monty said Ray McGovern's taking RFK Jr. to task at a town hall meeting on genocide in Gaza. That was awesome. Oh, I got to see that. Good. Good. Yeah. People have to stuff his nose in it. Yeah, what a fail. Yeah, there's I was thinking also about one thing. I just shared in the chat box a little link to a wonderful little documentary on Alma Deutscher, the child. Now she's not a child; she's probably 18 now. But the composer who was writing symphonies at the age of 7, modern times, right? And it's a wonderful documentary, but it goes through also her process, her homeschooling, the philosophy of her parents, and her own relationship to her sister, to herself. And what I liked a lot about it is it demonstrated what a real healthy educational process does by encouraging kids, because part of what she did as play, but also as workplace with her mom is build up these elaborate worlds and scenarios with stories and sub stories. And she would develop this since the age of like 2. They would just read stories together and then create their own, and it's play. But she, as a composer who also had a really wonderful music teacher who was using a certain classical compositional technique that's not practiced in academic musical training, it all involved both a rigor in terms of recognizing the modes, the basic melodies, all of these the rules so called, but very much heavily reliant on improvisation, right? So a lot of improv. He would start with a random melody of some sort, throw it to her, she'd take it somewhere, she'd throw it back at him, he'd take it somewhere, and it was like a playful thing. Now, in combination, you could just see when Alma is talking about one of the techniques that she's developed to compose these wonderfully elaborate modern classical pieces, she's describing these characters that she created that have very full, substantial personalities. Now, she's not schizophrenic, but she's created like a little mini pantheon of people who she can talk to. And when she's like, I'm a very happy person, but sometimes I have to have like a minor melody or a very sad melody for an opera that I'm making. And sometimes I'll have to throw the ball at Mercutio Casanostro or whatever this elaborate name is of this character that she created, who's a bit of a somber character, and he'll play with it and run a melody and then throw it back at me, and she describes how she can incorporate this into her broader composition, and it's a wonderfully healthy. I mean, it's in a 13-year-old girl talking about this as well. It's extraordinary. But it shows you like what Plato's doing in his dialogues is it's not just like a static dialectic or something of just like this person said this person said that. You could see he's really sympathizing to the point that he can get into the mind and emotional state vicariously of the person that he's talking to, but he doesn't lose himself either. It's not like the bad method acting where you just like, go to the extreme and all of a sudden you forget.
Don't sleep for 3 days to be tired.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or if you're gonna play a drug addict on stage, you have to go and like shoot heroin with in alleyways for 2 weeks or something, and that doesn't end well. But it's like being able to like both become the other, like feel the other's feeling and think what they're thinking and do it authentically, but at the same time not lose who you are in that same way too. And I think that the spell masters, they often will go to these extremes of either just static fakery that's a bit didactic, even though they call it a dialectic. Like I'm talking about the Neoplatonists, who are not very. It's like they're just trying to lecture you and sort of corral you in a direction using the form of the formula of a dialectic. But you're like, there's no paradox, there's no love of truth, there's no play, there's nothing.
Are you talking of the Neoplatonists of ancient times or of the present days?
I'm talking about both, but the ones I've been reading about more, the more recent, the more modern, the more modern ones who, they're not really living up to they're not really living up to it.
Well, they're not Platonists. They are using the second trick of lying precisely. They are using the prestigious framework of Plato for their own purposes and with their own twist. Okay. And I also want to say that we were speaking of humor as a major quality in the statesman. Humor precisely illustrate that, okay? What do you absolutely need to have humor? What do you absolutely need as ingredient to have humor?
Play.
Play, yeah, but there's something, I'm sorry to use the word, there's something more technical. There's something more organic. Organic is better than technical. There's something organic that if it doesn't exist, you cannot have humor.
Irony.
Love of truth.
Yeah, okay. I wouldn't be nice. I would accept love of truth and irony as a kind of answer to what I suggest. It's the presence of a center of awareness that is aware, that is conscious of what is in your mind. Okay, because if you don't have that center of awareness giving you a back step to what is spinning on the periphery of your mind, you cannot have humor. And the fancy word for that is meta representation.
Is that like a kind of sensitivity with yourself?
Yes, exactly. It's a kind of sensitivity of yourself. If you replace sensitivity with awareness, that you have self-awareness, meaning that you know what is your mind is spinning. Okay, when I said that no one can manipulate you if you can read your mind. So the plutocrats can put any BS in your mind because the mind is a recording machine. Okay, you know perfectly that we are submitted to a lot of advertisement, for example, and we record, the mind record them subconsciously. So the machine is working even without you being aware that it is recording some stuff. But if you have a center of consciousness, you will see the conditioning that is penetrating in you, and you will have a meta representation, or you will have a sense of humor or sense of irony with what is happening in your mind. Because once again, your mind in the inferior part, okay, 1, 2, 3, what is called the tabula rasa by Aristotle, because once again, he did not lie. That tabula rasa exists, but that is the inferior portion of the mind, can be conditioned because it is a recording machine. It is a biological recording machine. But if you have the presence of awareness that is the upper floor of the mind, you can be playful about what has been recorded when you are aware and when you are in a subconscious state. Okay, because let's not forget that everything that is in your mind has been recorded either when you are aware of the recording or when you are in subconscious state, not really aware of the recording happening.
And Aristotle also said, show me the child and I'll show you the man. Also not wrong in that sense, right? That the child is sort of absorbing whatever you give them. And that's why obviously the bad guys are, adamant about getting to the children. But the problem, and you're right, Quan, about the awareness is that, so it is half true in that, show me the child and I'll show you the man. But the problem is because the child doesn't have that awareness. And if that's not allowed to be cultivated, right, or if that's repressed and all you get is the first part, then yeah, technically Aristotle is correct. Show me the child and I'll show you the man.
Yes, he was right for the time dimension, or he was right for the lower trigram. He was right for the animal kingdom. Absolutely. Half truth. So I think that you know now how to lie. Because even lies need the power of the truth.
Yeah.
And those lies work because they have some truth in them, but it's not the whole truth.
Okay, Quan, so when you were saying what's necessary for humor, or what's the prerequisite or whatever for humor, your answer to that was awareness or self-awareness or awareness of what's going on in your mind.
Exactly.
Correct?
Correct. And
because I thought the answer was humility.
Oh, humility is another way to say humor in my mind. Because humility is precisely not to take the content of your mind seriously.
And being able to laugh.
And now
at
we're back to
yourself.
playfulness.
Exactly, because humility is what? Okay, suppose that I'm proud of my, I don't know, of my family, of my birth, or of my status, okay? And that idea is a piece of the mind. So if you have humor, you have a meta representation of that, so you don't take it 100% seriously. So humility is another word for the sense of humor, because you're not capable to laugh at yourself if you don't have humility.
The best example as well is satire, right? Where there's things are pushed to their extreme, to an absurd extreme, such that we can't help but laugh. There's a certain point where people break out laughing because the idea has been pushed to its extreme, and you realize, like, hey, this is off. But in realizing that something's off, you have to have a certain awareness about something else, right? The laughter comes from realizing like in hypnosis, I remember reading Pattern Interrupts, and Richard Bandler would talk about using humor. It's actually quite profound, and it made me. I've been thinking about humor more. He was talking about like somebody that had phobia of needles, and so he would get them to. He'd ask them like, "How big is the needle? You know, like show me. Like, do you have an image of this needle that you're afraid of?" And they'd say yes. And then he'd say, "Okay, because can you show me how big it is?" And so they'd show him. You know, they'd maybe like it's like a half meter stick or half ruler stick, and he said, "Okay, could you double it?" And so then they double the image, and he says, "You know, can you show me this double image?" So they show it with their hands, let's say, and he says, "Okay, could you double it again?" And just by getting the patient to blow the image up, you get a certain pattern interrupt where the person just stops and they start laughing because you realize it's the size, right? It doesn't make sense. It's the size of your image, and you can sort of free people from these ideas that they're attached to after just by kind of blowing them up and bringing them to their extremes. And having heard that, when I watch a lot of good comedians now, you see that's exactly what they're doing. They're blowing it up. They're bringing things to their extreme, which sound absurd, but there's a logic there. And it's bringing it to the absurd limit where you become aware of the logic. And that's what's funny.
Absolutely. And since we're in Plato, Greek comedy and Greek tragedy, okay, it was a collective endeavor to create a sense of humor and to create awareness.
That's true. They would always perform a comedy with a tragedy.
Yeah.
It would never just be one or the other. Are you a tragedian or are you a comedy poet? You were expected to be able to develop both of those attributes. That's
Chekhov,
And you know,
in modern times, is kind of like a remaster of that. All of his situational comedies. I mean, they were out of tragedy. It was tragic situations, but they were hilarious. You know.
yeah.
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 Cool. Jonathan Swift's pretty great too, in terms of like dark, dry humor, where he could like push eating babies, which is nobody wants to say it and nobody thinks about it, but it's like if you push the logical consequence of the world that he's living in and the type of like Hobbesian ethos that only values that doesn't value the sacredness of life and pushes poverty to those limits, you're essentially, you know, that's not too many steps beyond the type of oligarchical ethics that he's intervening upon and that society is like adapting to, which would apply to our current day too.
Yes.
Guys, it's 11 o'clock. I got an early morning tomorrow, but this is wonderful. This is the time flew. Kairos really dominated over Chronos tonight. So I really appreciate everybody's participation. This is good. We'll discuss. Does anybody have a proposition? I had a few thoughts of what we could read as a follow-up to this. I was partially thinking maybe the Seventh Letter might be fun, or Platonic Dialogue, maybe the Gorgias, or something completely other. I don't know. Anybody have any suggestions they want to toss out there?
Why not the Sophist? That's the jump from 3 to 4.
Sophist it is. All right, so we'll do the Sophist.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And then maybe something Asian. I know, Quan, you dropped some interesting references in your newest essay series that I find fascinating. And who's the author that you relied upon?
Gu Hongming.
Yes.
Gu Hongming.
Right. That's the scholar who was the Confucian like giant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's very interesting because he has been neglected by the Chinese themselves. Okay, because here I would try to have some sense of humor. I'm a Confucianist myself, but he has been a bit rejected by the Chinese because he had a Western education first. And it was a big mistake for the Chinese to reject him because he is probably the best blend that I know of West and of East and West, or West and East, and that happened centuries ago.
Interesting.
Fascinating.
All right, we're gonna get to know him.
Really?
But I think that since we and Plato, I think that going to the surface would be excellent, because I think that it's one of the most important Platonic dialogues in terms of epistemology, because it deals precisely with the transition from the psyche, stage 3, the highest stage of the animal kingdom, to the first stage of the timeless reality, meaning the timeless form of beauty, the inner sense of justice. And that is the most difficult transition, because once you are in the timeless form of beauty, you're safe, okay? The rest of your life is a long cruise. But as long as you're not in 4, your lives might be put in danger.
Interesting. Very you've sold it well. All right, so that's next week, Sophist.
Okay.
Guys, all right, good night. Good morning for you.
Good night.
All right, bye guys.
Ciao.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.